Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for tuning in to our live Q&A session with Brian Lucey. My name is Mark Abrams. I'm the content manager and moderator over on our Facebook group for Puremix. And I'm joined today by Brian Lucey. How's it going,
Well,
Brian?
I am awake and present, and I will wake up more as we go. You bear with me. It's a little early at LA time.
Nice. All right. So today I got to start off with some housekeeping stuff. First thing is we want to thank our sponsor for this event. So our sponsor today is Gear Sluts. So thank you guys very much for making this happen. And just a couple words on how it's going to go today. So we got questions from literally all over the world, which is crazy. We had more questions submitted for this Q&A than any other one. So thank you guys very much. Um, and what we're going to do is break up those questions into topics just so we can kind of stay on track, and we have so much to get to today. So I've got 8 categories for us today for you guys to think about in the live chat room too. Even with all these pre-submitted questions, we're still going to try and get to your questions as well. So please feel free to drop them in the chat. And these categories are, we're going to start off with career. We're going to talk about LUFS and loudness standards. We're going to talk about compression, online mastering, formats, acoustics, EQ, and Brian's workflow. Sound good?
Sounds good to me.
All right, cool. All right, let's start off with a career question.
All right.
So, our first question comes from Bob in Eureka, California. And he says, what does mastering do above and beyond the recording production process?
What does it do above and beyond? Well, it's part of the recording process. It's always been a part of the recording process. So I don't really separate it, Bob. What it does is really very dependent on who does it. You know, anybody can technically make a master. If we're talking about making a DDP and printing CDs, or taking a single and sticking a limiter and an EQ on it. There's a whole wide range of what mastering is, particularly today in this DIY era. So, in my mind, what it does is that it takes the the vision that was brought forward through a mix to a greater level of awesomeness in whatever way that means. Um, the Whether it be a single or whether it be a whole record, the notion that mastering is somehow just this little extra technical step at the end is very much the opposite of how I see it. I come to it as an artist, and to me, mastering is about making things awesome and exceeding people's expectations for what mastering can even be. For what is normally thought of as possible. I don't look at it as tips and tails and sort of balance out the EQ kind of a thing. I see it as a crucial musical step and a musical advancement step, just like a mix would be, or just like having the right preamp would be for the vocal, or getting the right vocal take. It's all part of the ongoing process of things getting better as they go, and things moving. I like to say roll the rock downhill. Doing things that really build momentum in the music. So when something comes out of mastering, it should be exciting, it should be satisfying, and it should be a musical upgrade from what happened before, which is the same thing you would say about mixing. You refer to the rough mix always, because rough mixes have a thing. That was the day that you were there. It's maybe technically not right, or the vision isn't quite what you want it to be, but there's always a mojo. So just like going into mixing and coming out, you want to have a big bump, and you should have that bump in mastering as well. Even when things are done really, really well, to me, there's always room for more. I'm sort of perpetually dissatisfied with even great mixes, and that's what, for me personally, allows me to do something with it. So it's part of the process. It's not a little, technical add-on at the end. It's
Right.
integrated part of the deal.
Yeah. Great. In your new video on Puremix, you talk about the 7-step production process.
Right.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I mean, it's an obvious thing. I think to everyone, but then again, it's maybe not obvious because again, we're in a DIY world where everything just becomes like one thing. You know, there's engineering, and I think it's important to be analytical sometimes about emotional things. And music making is an emotional thing. We're here to connect with other people. We're here to elevate their day. You know, whether the song be a depressing country song or the song be the brightest, poppiest, happiest song. In every case, we're doing the same thing. We're connecting one individual at a time. You know, the artist connects with one person, and if that's 500 or 5 million people, it doesn't matter. The process is still the same. We're connecting. So how do we get to connecting an artist with an individual is through this thing we call making music. So I like to break it down into the 7 steps and look at each step and find sort of the micro steps within the steps. And, you know, the more you think about this, it gets pretty exciting because you start to see that the whole process matters and also each little sub-step matters. And you start to get a feel for how much effort to put in to, you know, where are we going to put the mic on the kick drum, or is that vocal take sufficient, or whatever is the sub-step. You start to develop kind of a momentum building process. So that's a much longer conversation, and we can talk about that if you want, but just to define the steps. So we have a moment of inspiration. Okay, it could be a hook, it could be a musical thing, could be anything. Then we have an arrangement of that, where we take that idea, you know, back in the day, with you know, a band might have played for 30 minutes, and then the band whittles it down to 5 or 3. Or in this era, you might just have a vocal line, and you put a pop production around it, and it's just you and the computer. So there's a whole range of options to get from inspiration to arrangement. And then into pre-production. And pre-production, again, it's a wide range depending on, is it a live situation? Is it a one-person production pop situation? You can, for yourself, imagine all those options. But you're really thinking about strategizing how you're going to record. So we've got inspiration 1, we've got arrangement 2, we've got pre-production 3, and then we've got recording. Recording 4 overlaps with 5, which is the first of the sort of engineering steps. And again, allow me to kind of present this in a way that's kind of old school, because I think it's very helpful. Because even if you're doing something on your own and it's a one-person pop thing, you know, one woman doing the producing and one guy or girl singing, you're still functioning in this tradition. So at that 4th step of recording, of performance, which is the last step for the artist, then you bring in the tracking engineering, and that's where what we think of as engineering really starts, right? You've got mics and mic placement and preamps, and are we going to compress, and what converters, and all of this stuff that we obsess about in the engineering side. And then tracking engineering, which really back in the day was its own art form, right? There are still people who are known for that and have decades with that and teach that, and you teach it here at Puremix. There's a whole lot there in terms of tracking engineering. We have to be respectful and smart about that as being its own skill set, right? Then we've got mixing, which we all know what mixing is, and then we have mastering. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So all of these steps can go towards a positive, and at each of these steps, there's a whole bunch of little sub-steps in there, and each of those can go to the positive, or the opposite can happen, where we can fall into the cracks and get into the pitfalls that happen at various places. And that, again, is the bigger conversation, which is up to you if you want to do. But for me, the thing about the mini steps and the big 7 steps is to always have momentum happening. Things should be not devolving into perfectionism. And I kind of polarize between the two. Momentum creating versus perfectionism creating. When it gets perfectionistic, it gets fearful, and it gets, you know, there's like too much questioning. It goes beyond musical, intelligent, fun questioning. It goes into like this weird place. And when you recognize the weird place, you know what it is. We've all been there. We've all done it. So the trick is to keep the momentum going, kind of do what I call the 90% amount of effort where the quality of the step hits 90%, and we say, you know what, let's move on. And when you move on from there, you get the momentum bump, you go on to the next step, and so it goes. And if you do a whole record that way, you get to the end and you make, what I would consider to be a bit of a surprise, because the result ends up being really better than you could have thought in your mind. And the era we're in is very much like, well, I'm going to picture it, I'm going to go do it. But what's missing is the creativity of that.
Mm-hmm.
The creativity of that is when we get to 90% effort. If we were choosing to go to 91, it takes about as much effort to get to the 90 as to get to the 91.
Mm-hmm.
And if we press on to 92, now we're really getting into some really detailed, kind of perfectionistic, I would say fear-based thinking. And this is momentum killing.
Right.
It's not really enjoyable. So the trick is to learn like what's sufficient, and then let's move on. And then we go to the next step. Okay, that's sufficient. Let's move on. Okay, we get to about 90% of what's the ideal, perfect thing. Okay, let's move on. So if we do that at each of these steps, the record is infused with, the song, the full record, whichever, is infused with an energy which is very, exciting, life-affirming, joyful, connectable. This is the kind of process that we want to have. We want to have this fluid, momentum-building process so that the music comes across to people energetically as being full of life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Nobody wants to hear fear.
Right.
And nobody wants to hear perfectionism. Nobody wants to hear insecurity, right? We all have our own fears, perfectionisms, and insecurities in our daily existence. Music is a transformative thing. It elevates and connects and creates community and does all these things which are greater than the normal day, right?
Right.
So it's up to us to make the music carry those sort of qualities just inherent in the process, because the process is heard.
Right.
So this starts to get very esoteric, but to me, I could cynically just say music is marketing with a beat, and that would be kind of a shitty, cynical way to put it. The other positive way to say it is that music is the combined energy of everybody who's involved,
mm-hmm.
right? So the rhythm of the thing is an energy. We're breaking time up into rhythm. The melodic and harmonic elements are energy.
Right.
What comes out of the speaker is energetic. So the whole thing of making a song or making a record, whether it be vocal pop music or instrumental music, is to convey the energy of one group of human beings over to one other human being, and then they create a group of human beings. So this whole energy transfer thing, which is music, is very much tied to the 7 steps and all the mini steps that exist within the 7, which are very much up to each person to define. And we want to just have a flow, a joyful flow, not a perfectionistic flow. We want to be like, okay, that's pretty good. Let's move on. Okay, that's pretty. We got the kick drum in the right place. We got the vocal take. We got the mix. Let's move on. Let's move on. Let's move on. That joyful flow, energetically, I would argue, is heard by people on a subconscious level. They don't know they hear it. They just hear it.
Yeah.
And so in mastering, my contribution to that flow is when things come to me, they embody all the energy that came before. And my thing is to make sure that what comes out carries the joyful, connectable sort of patina energy from my step that heals and enhances anything from before. So there could have been some wounds, there could be some good stuff, there could be a cocktail of the two. Usually that's the case. No record is perfect. Most of them are not a train wreck, so it's somewhere in between. And then mastering is going to enhance that energetically, not just frequencies and volume and all the kind of technical mumbo jumbo that we get caught up in.
Right.
But the world I live in is like, those things are secondary. What's really important is the energetic presentation of the music so that people feel it quite instantly and it connects them to the artist. And this lasts for 20, 30 years. They always have that feeling. You pop on the song and it's like fresh, timeless, emotionally connectable, and the artist has stature. The artist sounds, feels legit. It takes the artist from like somebody who put a bunch of beats and a bunch of lyrics together to like sounding like an artist. There's there's an energy to greatness. So my little piece of the puzzle is just energetically making sure that at the end I do a good thing, you know.
Yeah.
But this same kind of thinking applies all the way along.
Hmm.
It applies all the way through.
Yeah.
Uh,
And when
long
you
long
say,
there, but
sorry, uh,
no,
when you say the healing process, are you hearing a lot from people when you send a master back to them? Maybe something that they were concerned with about the mix is resolved, and they feel better about it, more confident moving forward.
yeah, I mean that's the whole point. I mean, usually the notes that I get are, worry based, detail based production notes, right?
Yeah.
Like we struggled with this, or we wanted the bass to be here, or whatever. And I always listen to those,
Hmm.
and I encourage those, right? I want all the information I can get from a client, but I'm not going to address it through their lens. I'm going to address it through my lens and see if I can't pick up the pieces of all their notes along the process, right? And
Yeah.
of course, I'll refer to their note because I'm not ignoring their note,
Hmm.
but I'm not becoming you,
Right.
right? If I was going to become you, you could just do it. There's
Yeah.
no point in that. I'm going to do it from my experience, my perspective, and then I'm going to just have one ear over to what your thoughts were, whether it be a ref track or this, that for this song, this, that for that song. That, I sometimes get notes like that. So
Hmm.
I'm open to all of that. The more information, the better. But I don't let any of that lead what I'm doing. I just make sure that I pick up those things in the upgrading process. Make sure those get picked up along the way.
Sure. Cool. Okay, so next question.
Next question.
Um, this one's coming from Columbus, Ohio. It's not me.
Hey. uh
And from a person you know. This is from Cindy Vaughn.
Oh,
And
hi, Cindy.
she is asking, what made you determine to focus on mastering versus mixing? So what led you to mastering?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty good mix engineer. I'm pretty good. I don't, I'm not going to grade myself much more than that. I mean, I'm not top. I'm above average. I'm somewhere in that range. Um, I think in this, I'm going to answer this question in a general way. I think we have to do what we need to do,
Hmm.
firstly, and we have to do what's right for us. So to me, the mindset of a mixing engineer is a certain kind of a mindset. Like when a mixer walks into my room, or if I'm out at a party, or in some situation where maybe I'm at your room and there's 5 people in the room. It's very interesting to me to note how everyone hears music, because with any one piece of music, we could listen to it 1,000 ways,
Hmm.
right? When I was young, I heard guitars because I was a guitar player. As I started to sing more, I started to listen to singing, right? Much later in life did I ever listen to production ideas. Much later than that did I ever listen to mastering.
Right.
So we all can pick apart and focus on so many things with music, and we all do that. And sometimes our taste or our interest, right, our perspective, it
Hmm.
evolves. Sometimes we just are what we are. Some people are like, you know, um, I listen to the sousaphone, always the sousaphone.
Hmm.
There's not a lot of music for me out there, but I'm all about the sousaphone. Uh, Shout out to John Lincoln. So
Yeah, I was going to say the same.
um, that's a Columbus reference, folks.
Yeah.
The Hunter Tones, check them out. So the um, the way we listen is from our intention, it's from our experience, it's from our taste. So to come back to the question, uh, before I focused on music, I was an artist too. I used to paint and draw, and I did that sort of in between. I played music for a while, and then I was like, oh, I'm going to do this, and I needed to make music. And it's kind of the same way with mixer or mastering. I need to do this. This is my art form. This is what I do. At the end of doing lots of things, playing guitar, performing, writing, singing, playing piano, all this touring, recording, producing, other people, mixing, this is actually what I do. So how do we get to that? Figuring out what is it that we do. We just have to, be a little reflective on how are we listening.
Hmm.
So when I listen to overview. I listen to tone. I listen to texture. I listen to the kind of things that we talk about here in these questions, or that we've talked about in the video that we did, or that we're going to talk about in the future. I listen to how does music connect? What is the overall presentation say about the artist?
Mhm.
What does it do to enhance what the artist is saying? Put it that way. So if someone was in the room and they were just like super fascinated with snare reverb,
Mhm.
which is, I could do that too. I could become fascinated with that, or I could choose that. That would be more of a mixer thing, or maybe more of a producer thing, or maybe they're a drummer. That's
Mhm.
going to be more their thing. So really, we just have to be honest about sort of self-reflection on how do we listen to music. What's exciting to us? What's most exciting? What's most interesting? And then ultimately, what do we need in terms of our day-to-day life? Right? I liked performing, but I didn't really like loading in and out, and I didn't really want to live on a tour bus.
Mhm.
I like mixing, but I was frustrated with the mixing process because too many cooks in the kitchen, and I wanted to work very quickly. So for me, mastering is also on a practical level. It's I work alone for the last for almost 20 years or whatever it's been in this era of DIY. I mean, I work alone, so I can work on my own schedule, different times of the day, and I can work in my highest state and do what I do.
Mhm.
And for a lot of people, that it's more satisfying to be in the mixing process,
Right.
and they listen like a mixer. It's more satisfying to be a producer. There's a creative element to that they find necessary. For me, I get all the creativity, if you will, out of this step. This is
Yeah.
enough. I've made my own music, done my own things. It was cool, but this is really my sort of art form, my right thing to be doing.
Mhm.
And you just have to look at what do you need, what are you good at, what does the world want you to do, and that all begins really with how do we listen. I realized late in life that I'd been listening like a mastering engineer the whole time. I didn't know that. I didn't know
Right.
what mastering was. I didn't care what mastering was. I mean, I
Mhm.
saw I saw Bob's name on a lot of stuff when I was a kid, and didn't think twice about that. You know,
Mhm.
back in the day. So I didn't even think about what mastering was until I had done all these other steps in the gig,
Yeah.
and it was just like it just came on first as a practicality for me, and it just has become uh, a whole its own whole thing.
Yeah.
But it begins with being reflective, like how do we listen to music,
Yeah.
and we can all think about it, and we can all realize that, oh, we've always listened like a saxophone player, or we've always listened like a producer, or we've changed over time, and that's
Mhm.
fine. That's fine. So
Yeah.
I hope it's, again, my answers tend to be long. I hope that gives the overview, and
No, that's
also
great.
gets to the detail of that answer.
Yeah, and it's a very aware approach of going after it, right? Like you were very in tune with the point of I like this step.
Yeah, and you have to, in life you have to do the next step. You can only do what's in front of you. You have two or three options, and you pick one. You do that, and you can do what's in front of you. And for me, mastering didn't present itself until sort of the late '90s, and I started to play with it, and and I was still doing lots of other things. I was making music, producing music, mixing. Excuse
Mhm.
me. So eventually, it just kind of took over. It organically took over.
Right.
Now, that's a longer process. If you want to be more efficient about it, the answer I'm giving helps with that, which is how do you listen?
Yeah.
What do you listen to? What do you listen for? What is really exciting to you? Because if you want to be successful in life, you've got to focus on the things that resonate with you. The universe is not cruel, in my opinion. We're not like put here to suffer.
Sure.
Uh, the way that we find what it is that is our thing is by just noticing what brings us to life, what we're good at, what how do we perceive music is really the key question in all of that, I think.
Right. Yeah. Great. Okay, we're gonna
Hope.
go to something I think is gonna be a little bit of a more boring topic for you, but this will be interesting.
Oh, I'm
Okay.
not bored.
All
I'm
right.
never.
So this is gonna be about LUFS, which is
Okay.
the new Loudness standards.
LUFS.
And chat room, if you guys want to ask some questions about this, just
That
do
Beatles song,
something.
loves. No, sorry.
So if you want to ask questions about this, we have Mike Glazer in there. He's moderating the chat. Everybody say hi to Mike. He looks like his name is Puremix, but his name's Mike. Busted Mike. So just let him know. Maybe put like LUFS : and then your question so that he knows that it's actually about this category, and we'll try to get to it. So
Right.
our first question on LUFS comes from Sam Cook in New York. And Sam says, "Hey Brian, how do you consider loudness normalization happening in the mainstream platforms, so YouTube, Spotify, etc., when mastering your songs? Did you change your target level because of it? Do you provide different masters for different streaming platforms? Are you targeting any LUFS, final loudness? If yes, is this integrated loudness or maximum short-term loudness? Thanks a lot."
Okay, yeah, good question. It's very much kind of timely. Um, so again, I'm going to do practice what I preach. I'm going to give you the overview answer, and hopefully we'll include the details. All of the streamers are doing their own thing, right? There's much talk about that. There's plenty of education about that we can all do. My gut feeling is that those numbers, those methods, those codecs may change, but they may not. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But in principle, I make one master. Mastering is about, again, it's presenting the artist in a way where the vision connects. So to this day, I still make one master. The target level for that hasn't really changed too much over the recent years versus the earlier years. So why is that? Well, firstly, the nerdy pursuit is, oh, Spotify is this and da da da, and you can get the Nugent plug and you can listen to all of them. Okay, I get that. We could all play that game. The problem with that is you're instantly turning it into a science project. You're turning music making into the thing which is, to me, the wrong idea.
Mm-hmm.
You're turning it into like, what number is it, and da, 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 how does it sound on these platforms? Well, if those platforms are going to change, what are you going to do then? So there's a good argument for chasing the tail of the platforms, but I don't follow that argument. I think the stronger argument is for making a great record that sounds good on those platforms as well.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we do that? Well, there's firstly never been a drop in any of my clients, and I have, depending on the month, 40 or 50 people. No one has ever said it's too loud based on my process. Let me take that back. Maybe one person every 3 or 4 months says that the first pass I send them is a little too loud, which is okay, fine. So we revise that quickly. That's easy. That's great. That's great
Mm-hmm.
news. I have a target that's, for me, based on not just a number, but there's the inner workings of that number are important. The crest factor element, or the punch element, or there's things that you can't measure in a LUFS number, which are musical things.
Right.
This is what I'm trying to say, and sort of saying badly.
Yeah.
So there are musical things within, two things that are at a -6 or a -8 or whatever it is. They're going to sound very different. So the number doesn't capture everything that the music is, right? That's kind of obvious, but let's state that. So my process is to go for a certain kind of loud, but still feels dynamic and musical. I always make things as loud as I can, but not to the point where, to my taste, they're going backwards on musicality.
Right.
So that's always been what I do, and I still do it now. And those results sound good on the platforms. No one's come back and said, oh, I thought what I liked from you was awesome, but I'm listening to it on Spotify and it sucks. Right? We don't end up there. So how do we not end up there? Is we make sure that we're loud enough, but not too loud, and that within the sound of the master there is enough sort of dynamic punch, energy, space to not have this sort of flat, overcompressed, overly limited thing.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we'll get kind of deep for a second. Your intentions matter. Our intentions matter, because going to the first thing we said about energy, the intentions that we bring to the table is actually what we put into the project. So let me try and give a practical example. Without naming names, there are certain mastering engineers who always sound to me like they personally are insecure.
Mm-hmm.
And their work sounds to me, in my taste, insecure. What do I mean by that? It's got certain mid-range frequencies pushed, and everything is in your face, and it is trying very hard to get your attention. Everything they do is trying hard to get my attention.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming that's their intent. Let's get attention, right? It's like a billboard.
Yeah.
It's like a marketing.
Instead of the song.
Let's hit people over the head. Let's flash the neon light. Let's put out all the strobes. Hey, here's the song, right? Mm-hmm. Which to me takes away from the music and the artist, because you end up hearing like a beer commercial. You end up hearing marketing. Mm-hmm. And I believe that people are increasingly susceptible to sincerity and integrity and artistic value, right? Because we can all make music. Everybody can make music, right? And we all love to make music. Right. So we're competing against a wider, bigger world of music makers for attention. So if you go about seeking this attention with a in-your-face result, it's conceivable, and I believe it's the case, that you're going to lose people, because they're going to perceive that you're trying hard to get their attention. Mm-hmm. That's not what they want. Right. They don't want to be marketed to. They don't want to be sold. They don't want to be hit over the head. They don't want a big neon sign. They want to connect. They want to feel not alone in the world because someone's speaking to them. Mm-hmm. And they want to feel connected to people who also feel that same way about that artist. And they want to feel excited. They want to feel like they've found something authentic and awesome. And they want to tell their friends about it. So this is the moment I think we're in. Mm-hmm. I think we're in the moment where musicality, authenticity, artistry, the individuality of the artist, connecting and creating community, that's the moment we're in. So if we're looking at an intention, which is around pushing something in your face, I'm going to just go off track for a second, but you bear with me. The 90s, for example, when I wasn't mastering, was to me like, that was where I was like, oh, F it, I gotta do something about this. Mm-hmm. Everything was overcompressed. There's no low mids, which is where the intimacy lives. There's no low end, which is where the Africa is, where the rhythm is, where the dance is. Mm-hmm. And it was just this kind of in-your-face, kind of mid-rangey rock sound, hip-hop rock, kind of radio 90s. It's my least favorite era of all of the last, 60. So the intention matters. And when we're talking about LUFS, we have to be very careful that we're not getting caught up into looking at this as a science project. Right. Music making has a lot of science in it, and a lot of us are math science people, but we have to be artists first, and we have to be humanists first. So a LUFS number in and of itself does not mean much. It does mean a few things, but it's not the be-all, end-all. What's more important is that the artists connect. So in a roundabout way, coming back to the question, I'm still doing one thing, one result, and I'm letting the chips fall in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm doing is making sure that it's loud enough to get through a meeting, loud enough to get through a playlist,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also musically juicy and has enough, dynamic motion. I mean, you can have a very loud record that still moves air.
Right.
I did some loud records last year, in particular, but every year I do a few loud records that can still move air. And this is it's very hard to measure this.
Yeah.
This is where you're getting into the real subtlety of what's the difference between a good mastering job and a great one, or a good one and a medium. Like, that's kind of where you're getting into why it is we do what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Is to be able to make a loud thing that doesn't seem loud.
Right.
To tick those boxes technically, but really more importantly, to always focus on presenting the artist in a way that's compelling.
Yeah.
And so, I'm still aiming for me, it's not a LUFS thing, although, it tends to be, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there, depends. Mm-hmm. But I more look at it with some, there's some API console meters I can show you, I think.
Yeah.
On this, these little guys right here, that's just two meters out of an old API desk that I had put into that box, and there's a couple potentiometers on the back, and I don't set it to any standard but my own. Red is loud and +3 is really effing loud.
Nice.
Okay, so and the ballistics allow me to kind of see things bounce.
Yeah.
And so I get it up in that range with my eyeballs,
mm-hmm.
but never overwhelming what my ears are telling me about the balance between, loudness and punch.
Right.
So the idea that things have to be -12 or whatever, it's absurd. It's absurd. I don't want to hear music like that. To me, that sounds old in many cases, and it's not the right kind of old. Now, if it was a country record, or if it was something where we were trying to intentionally be dynamic, we might go to -15. We might do like a thriller style thing, right? And that could be a really cool, bold, artistic statement. But even if you listen to Get Lucky or something like that, it's not thriller. So there's an element of loudness which is making things sound current. There's sounding current, and then there's sounding bad.
mm-hmm.
And you can sound current and not sound bad. You can have a pretty high average and still have punch. None of this stuff is really measurable. You've got to be able to hear it, and you've got to be able to make it happen.
Right.
In production and in mastering, both.
Yeah.
So, did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, more importantly, it's about what is your take on all of that stuff, right? And I think what we're getting out of the conversation is that it's about the feeling of it. It's about the dynamic range as you are intending to go for it, more than I need to live with it in the standard. And yes, I have all this extra dynamic range, but maybe I don't want to use it for the purpose, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm ultimately I'm not big on rules.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not big on authoritarianism. I'm big on artistic statements. I'm big on individuality of the artist coming across. I'm big on connecting with people. I'm big on elevating people's life through music.
Mm-hmm.
None of this has anything to do with level per se, but the level is part of the cocktail to get into the conversation. So, have I changed anything? Do I use the plug-in that shows me all the things? No, I don't work like that.
Right.
I think when you go down that path, you're starting to. It's an inevitably insecure basis. You're starting to let the dog chase its tail.
Mm-hmm.
We need to lead, and we need to lead musically, and we want to present an artist in a way that's undeniable on all the platforms.
Yeah.
And the way to do that is to not suck, not to look at the numbers.
It's good advice.
Yeah, don't suck. So yeah, I mean, it's like last year, this is sort of the era we're in. We're in 2018. In 2017, the issue was robot mastering. That was the issue of the moment,
Right.
and there'll probably be another issue next year. All of these issues are distractions to pull us away from being musical and to get us to turn this into a science project. And I resist that. Always have, always will.
Right.
That's not what makes things great.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do have a question about that for a little bit later. So I'll hold you there. Let's do one more on LUFS, and let's see if you feel like we've already addressed these. We'll just kind of skip them so we can get to other topics. But
Sure.
I'll go ahead and read it, and
Try and be a little shorter. I know I'm long-winded.
Oh no, it's great. I mean, that's really one of the biggest topics that we had for today was the whole LUFS thing, and it's very current with what's happening right now. And,
It is very current, so I
yeah.
want to make sure I hit it. I'm not saying that it's irrelevant. I'm saying that it shouldn't be how we go about making decisions.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just looking at a digital meter, it's telling you something, but it's telling you less than half of what's important.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, in a professional situation, it's not up to me.
Yeah.
It's conversation. So I might send something back to you, and you say, "Oh, it's a little too hot." More likely, you might say, "I want it louder." But after years and years of doing this, you start to see there's an average, a sort of expected target that everybody has.
Yeah.
It's a pretty global target. I mean, I have clients all over doing every stuff. I kind of know where to send things, where it's going to tick the box of, okay, it's loud enough for me, and it's also not going to sound shitty on all the platforms.
Right.
It's going to hold up and have consistency.
Yeah.
And things I did before Spotify, or things I did before, YouTube or whatever, you can go listen to it, and it's fine, right? So I've had my moments of fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the fear thing, like, oh gosh, maybe I just did everything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I go listen to a couple things. I'm like, oh no, that sounds great. In mastering, nothing ever sounds the same, ever.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't a new idea. It's not a new idea that, oh, Spotify or YouTube or, what have you, Apple Music, it's all going to be different.
Yeah.
It's always been different, right? It never sounds the same anywhere, ever.
Yeah.
The point of mastering is to make it sound like itself and sound consistently good everywhere.
Right.
So when I hear my work out in the world, I'm at a bar, or I'm at a restaurant, or I'm in the car on the radio or whatever, I'm just listening to that. Does
Mm-hmm.
it sound like itself? Did the musical qualities that are my focus carry through on that platform? Answer yes. Problem solved. There is no problem.
Yeah.
So don't get distracted by shiny things.
Right.
The numbers, it's not really what we're doing.
Right. Yeah, and here's a fear-based thought for you is for let's say you're going for the neg 14 target, right? And then in 10 years, a friend of mine actually said this to me yesterday. I thought it was really good. He's like, 15, 20 years ago, we thought AOL would be around forever, right? So
Right.
who says that Spotify will be here? And today's minus 14 may be minus 8 again in 10 years. And then what do you do? Because you have all of these negative 14 LUFS masters.
Yeah, or we'll just be streaming 24-bit files.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, technology's not going to stop. So,
right.
things are going to change, and in 30 years from now, I want things to still be great. So, it's chasing the tail of the technological moment, to me, is pretty sad. That's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a depressing way to live. I would suggest that people don't do that. I would suggest that, again, in a professional situation where you have somebody to bounce off of, it's maybe easier. But if you're working on your own, just focus on being great. And there's so many more things that are important. I mean,
Sure. Yeah.
Without disrespecting clients, people will come back to me with a million little details depending on the client. Somebody will say, oh, this little thing or that, because we get caught up in details through the production process.
Mm-hmm.
But sticking with overview questions is more important. I could be a smartass and say to somebody, well, I mean, with that vocal, I'm not sure if that one snare hit in the third chorus really matters. But I'm not going to say that to someone now to be rude.
Right.
But that's what I'm thinking. I'm trying to do things to make that vocal sound better, because without a great vocal, nothing matters.
Right.
Without a great rhythmic section, rhythmic element, nothing matters, right? So big picture things matter far more than detail things. And we end up getting in the weeds way, way too often.
Right.
And this is another one of those weeds, really.
Yeah. Cool. Great answer. All right, let's see if our next LUFS question sparks anything.
More LUFS.
More LUFS. This comes
LUFS.
from Thomas in Ireland. And he says, recently I've heard that major labels require industry standard loudness in mastering. Simply nobody cares, for example, that Spotify recommends -14 LUFS for submitted tracks, that dynamic is a new loud. They, the majors, want it as loud as other commercial releases. Right. What can be done about it? How do you feel with this sort of issues if you experience it?
Yeah, okay. So again, let's go big picture. Louder records have always been better, and human nature is basically built that way. It's like it's in the monkey brain. It's way back in the monkey brain.
Where's the line? Where's the line?
Right. Yeah. And we hear better from behind for the same reason, right? Mm-hmm. The line in front we can see, the one behind we can't see. So this isn't going away in terms of an innate human thing. Now let's look at the majors. Major labels are good people, and they love music, and they're trying to make money, and they're trying to make the quarterly numbers for the corporation. But you can't look to people like that to be changing the world. They're not changing the world. I mean, if you don't have a couple million social media followers and your Spotify isn't blowing up, they're not going to pay any attention to you anyway. Let's just start with that. So it's kind of a strange way in by thinking, what do they want? But you're right. They want things that are loud because they're going to listen at a meeting where they just pop it in, and they're not listening on Spotify. They're not listening necessarily on YouTube. They're going to pop it in around the office with a couple other things, and there's still that level playing field of what it sounds like just in a playlist. Now they're probably going to listen to MP3, but that doesn't bother me for other reasons. We could talk about 24-bit versus MP3. That's a whole other conversation. But the LUFS thing is just a continuation of what it always was. I mean, when you were making vinyl before I was doing this, anecdotally, I didn't do it, obviously, but some of it was, before I was born, I imagine. Louder vinyl was getting you the gig. So we're at the point now where, of course, we could put a -3 square wave of pink noise or whatever, and it would be doable because we can do anything with digital. So we've gone all the way up, and now the question is, are we coming back? Are we coming back
right.
more than we thought we were? Are we still where we thought we were? You can't change the world with level. You can only change the world with great music. Mm-hmm. And level is part of that cocktail. But again, it's focusing on the wrong thing, in my opinion.
Sure.
There's a lot of people I respect who spend a lot of time crusading for getting more dynamics into music. And hey, I'm all for that. If that's what your crusade is, go for that.
Yeah.
My crusade is be awesome musically.
However you achieve it.
Don't suck, don't be average, don't be good. You're competing with the recorded history of music, and you're competing with everything that's coming out now, which is a million things a minute. Mm-hmm. So your only chance is to be artistically awesome. And the technical level, LUFS and all that plays a part, but it's not the game. So, and back to his question, it's, they want it to be loud. People get insecure. They just do. Mm-hmm. It's a fear-based insecurity thing. So on the one hand, I rally against fear-based insecurity. On the other hand, I accept it. People are people. We're not going to change them by demanding all records be printed at -10 or whatever. It's not going to change human nature overnight.
Yeah.
It's not going to change human nature. People have to choose to change. And when you're talking about a label situation, firstly, this is an irrelevant conversation because they just want to see that you're famous, or you've got 2 million this,
Yeah.
or 5 million this, or they want to see big numbers, right? And they're like, oh, we can sell that.
Yeah.
So that's what they're looking at, right?
Right.
We can sell that.
And
That's our
how about your interaction with labels and with A&R? I mean, do you ever hear back from them about any of this?
yeah, they they tend to be like every other client, which is they want things to be loud most of the time.
Yeah.
Some people will bring it back, but generally, they're sticking their stuff onto a playlist with MP3s on the phone or what have you, or
Hmm.
CDs or whatever they do. It's digital to digital without Spotify, without the rest of it.
Yeah.
The thing with Spotify, for example, is you can have a quote unquote louder record, but if it has dynamic motion, if it has inherent punch, what you might call microdynamics, things that move air within that limited RMS, it'll still work just fine.
Hmm.
So that's really more of the game. It's not the number. The number is so misleading. You know,
Right. Right.
um, maybe if I had lots of free time, I would pull up for you right now something I had done to solve this. To give you an example, where you'd have like two things that are at -8, or two things that are at -5, or two things that are at -12, whatever, and you would hear how different they are.
Yeah.
It's not the thing. But
Yeah.
so back to his question, yeah, people still want loud records. What a shock.
Right.
You know, we're still the humans that we are.
Yep.
It's not to say we give in to that and we just don't think of it. I just don't think that's the right priority. The
Yeah.
priority should be being artistically awesome, and whatever dynamics suit your style, your moment in time, your whole thing. Let's just make that work.
And
Just
also
make
satisfying monkey brains.
and also satisfying monkey brains. Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Let's,
Let's do another one. I'm gonna skip off the LUFS topic. I think we've done that, and let's talk about compression. So, our next question comes from Demos Stathios. Sorry, anybody, if I mispronounce your names. And this is from Xanthi, Greece. How do you deal, compressor-wise, with tracks that have big dynamic ranges like orchestra music?
okay. Well, the first thing of that is that what I would prefer is to never compress. So when I start working, I don't reach for compression. I EQ, 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 and limit,
Hmm.
and limit and EQ. Those are the two. Compression is a production step, and you know everything that you can do in a production, with the exception of the overall level, that I believe you should do, and it should suit the style, and it should suit the artist. So with very dynamic music, I'm going to leave it dynamic unless otherwise instructed.
Hmm.
Um, and if it's not dynamic, if it comes in really slammed, I might look to put some dynamic motion in it, which happens partly with the analog chain
Hmm.
and things you can do with EQ in conjunction with tubes and different things that are going on in my chain. So you can have something that's quite limited or quite heavily compressed, and I might get more out of it, or I might have something that comes in quite wide, and I might leave it wide. The only time I'm going to lessen that dynamic range is if I'm asked to do so. For example, I did a record for an artist named Ryan Bingham, and I think it's the third record I've done. American sort of country blues rock Americana artist,
Hmm.
and did the whole thing. Third record with him. I know what they like. They know what I do. Everything's good. And then we get to just about being at the end. And, oh, by the way, Brian, track 9 is the first single. Could you do something to it? Because the level sounds lower. So this was the actual client note.
Hmm.
She wouldn't mind me telling the story. Well, I listened to it. The level actually wasn't lower if we looked at a number.
Hmm.
For example, this is a good example where the number doesn't matter. if I looked at the loudest point in the track, and I looked at the meter, if I just use my ears and I feel the energy, which is more important than meters, is using your body to feel frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't really lower. But what was lower was the vocal level was lower and the dynamics were greater than many of the tracks. And because it was the lead single, which I didn't know until this point in the process, I listened to that with that new piece of information. And again, at this point, the record is done. And she's like, but track 9, that's kind of the lead single, and it seems kind of low. So I go back. Is it really low? Not really.
Mm-hmm.
Is it low as a lead single? Yes. Why is it low? Well, it's a very dynamic mix compared to the rest, and the vocal isn't really where it should be for a single.
Mm-hmm.
So I did compress that, and it was easy. I just compressed that one track. And there might have been some compression on the whole record, but maybe less than a dB with the hardware.
Mm-hmm.
So with that one track, I used a plug-in compressor, the Fab Filter. The clean mode has a little kind of a mid pop to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that popped the vocal because it tilted the frequency in the right way. Without even EQing, that compressor popped the vocal and did compression and did the whole thing.
Yeah.
It took 5 minutes, but I wouldn't have known that without her note.
Right.
So that's an example where, I did compress something within a record that was already kind of done, but looking at the track visually, you could see that it had more dynamic range. Sure. Listening to it, you could feel that the level was actually there, the power was there, the energy was there, but not to her perception.
Yeah. It's more of a presence than energy.
Getting into what really matters, which is like, what is this track for? This vocal matters why. The level matters why. None of this has to do with numbers. And her note wasn't actually even, it's not to say she was wrong, because she was right, but her perception of it in terms of her words wasn't really accurate because the level was there.
Mm-hmm. But
the level wasn't there to be a lead single.
Sure. Mostly
the vocal level, and mostly it was too dynamic. That's really what she was hearing. So a lot of times, again, it's a conversation with a client. I'm pretty good at predicting what people are going to say before they say it. But if I'm wrong, if I didn't hit the target quite right, then it's about interpreting what they're saying and figuring out what they really mean. Sure. So when she said that's not loud enough, if we'd have pulled up the LUFS, I suppose it probably was. But it wasn't in context for the reasons I've mentioned. Yeah. So, I try and always respect what's there, enhance what's there in a kind of a balance. Mm-hmm. I do to it what I wish it was doing or what I think they wish it was doing. And we kind of try and dovetail those ideas. Mm-hmm. But dynamic music, obviously, if they wanted it to be less dynamic, they would have done that. So. Sure.
I have a question for you from our live room. This one's from Pat. Pat's asking if you ever use parallel compression.
I don't, Pat. I tried it a bit back when it was first trendy. Mm-hmm. Kind of in this era. I don't remember when that was. It was maybe 10 years ago. When I first got the Alpha compressor, I think that's when parallel was first kind of showing up as a current trend, maybe a decade ago. And there's just phase artifacts from that I don't like. Mm-hmm. Now in production and working with a vocal or the thickening that comes from that and the balance between transients and compression can be great. But in mastering, no. And I would say in mixing, I wouldn't, because we're already in a pretty modern situation with levels and compression and limiting, and I'm trying to do everything I can to have clarity and sonic and sort of integrity to the punch. Mm-hmm. So parallel is innately destructive of that because the way that the time smear is between the signals.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. Let's see another one from our pre-submitted here. This one comes from Philippe in Switzerland. And he's asking, assuming the mastering engineer will be able to do more with headroom, I spend quite a bit of time controlling peaks and levels while mixing. And before sending the final mix, is this worth the effort? Could you kindly share a few good indicators to monitor during the mix process? So kind of asking what, how much should he be worrying about his peaks before he sends to mastering?
Gotcha. Um, yeah, I mean, it, as long as the mix is peaking above, let's say, -20
Hmm.
and below zero, I'm happy. Because, 20 may or may not be technically exactly accurate, but you're getting all the 24-bit goodness pretty far down there.
Hmm.
Um, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Even if it's hitting zero, you don't want to go over. You're more worried about really plug-in maintenance in terms of plug-in levels and clipping plugs and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
That's more the issue than peak level to mastering. And the first thing I do with a song or a group of songs is they're in Sequoia, and I immediately start playing with the volume of each song relative to the others.
Yeah.
So it's not a big deal. What's really important for you in mixing is to be looking more on the instead of the overview, which is what you're talking about. That's more of an overview topic. Is to be looking on the inside of the track, to be looking at the compression and the relationship between pieces of compression, kicks and snares and vocals. So look at the master fader, how it moves through sections. You want to infuse as much. It's ironic, but the more control that you put in to make it sound natural, the better. You know,
Hmm.
uh, if you just let something sit there in a mix, it you would think it was more natural, but actually it just seems untreated. It gets messy.
Right.
So we go in mixing and we get aggressive and we do lots of interesting things where we exert ourselves on the naturalism that comes
Hmm.
to us, but we do it to make it actually sound like it's more natural. So it's a bit of a interesting thing that you have to spend effort to make it sound effortless. So the effort that you want to spend isn't on that overview stuff. It's really on, dynamic motion through the sections of the song, relationships,
Hmm.
relationships, relationships, compression relationships, EQ relationships, panning relationships, the composition of faders and pans. How does the song begin, or does it begin over here? How does the chorus come? How
Yeah.
how how does the fader and pan evolution happen? All of those things are what mixing is about. Level wise, yeah, just get it somewhere between -20 and zero, and send it off, and that'll be fine for anybody who's helping you.
Here's a cool compression one from Eric in the live chat. He says, "What do you do to an overcompressed mix?"
Yeah, that's a good question. So overcompression often is most easily solved um, with uh, sharp EQ cuts
Hmm.
or boosts and cuts. So compression and frequency don't exist on an island, right? They're completely intertwined. So as you compress something, you change the frequency balance of the thing,
Hmm.
right? It usually gets muddier depending on how you're compressing, but it depends on the compressor. So I shouldn't say that. If it was just a clean, boring compressor and you had a nice little piece of music and you compress, you're probably going to bring up some sort of low end and low mids as you go. It's going to
Yeah.
get contested. So a lot of times, again, I'm skipping what color compression does and innate EQs and
Hmm.
the EQ balances of transformers. We're skipping all that. Just saying, in a general term, clean compression on a clean mix, it's going to make it more dense in different frequency places. One of those might be low end, low mids. So the first thing I do is just go in and find places where the music isn't moving in the low end. I
Yeah.
always want things to move air, and moving air is about having big peaks and having dips near it, so that things can be focused. It's a wall of sound in low end equals no punch.
Right.
Peaks and dips in low end equals punch, moving air, dynamic interest, emotional excitement. So
Contrast.
the first thing is about just having great monitoring and a great room that you can hear low end. That's
Yeah.
that's what mastering does that other people can't do. Like
Yeah.
I can hear things quickly, easily, more easily, and in more detail than you can hear in your room. So I'm
Yeah.
just going to go in and do some things and just find some energy, find some motion by eliminating or maybe even boosting some frequencies.
Yeah.
Uh, but probably starting with cutting things
Kind
because
of
there's
a
plenty of energy there.
yeah, a fun thing, like a thing about your room, and we're gonna get to acoustics in a minute, but I personally like the story because it was a really big moment for me. We were at your place, and you were giving us cookie dough upstairs, and you had a track on the speakers that I had heard a million times before, and I heard a pumping in the compression that I had never heard from the second floor of your building. That was
Yeah.
that was a pretty interesting thing for me. It was also a moment of like, a well-tuned mastering room can really show you things pretty quickly. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
even while you're eating cookie dough a room away. Well, that's an
yeah,
interesting point. I'll take that point to mixing just to make a side point. I think it's really great to just walk down the hall away from your production, away from your studio, away from your bedroom, wherever you're working. Just get away from music. Get away from this, 20 to 20 perfectly symmetrical sort of thing that you're doing. Just walk away from it.
hmm,
When you walk away, you walk down the hall, you hear musicality. You hear big picture things. It's a lot easier to hear some very important things when you get away from it.
yeah,
So that's kind of a side, but yeah. So with over compression, the sometimes the last resort is actually to compress more.
hmm,
But again, it's doing it in a way that the net result doesn't sound compressed.
yeah,
Compression in and of itself is not a bad thing. Compression is not the enemy.
right,
Um, Compression is about creating punch.
yeah.
It's about moving air. It's not about stopping it from moving.
And
So,
uh, back on that question, is there a specific technique that you find that you have to do when you do get an overcompressed mix in? If you,
well, again, the technique is have a great room,
hmm,
know what you're looking for. It all starts with being able to hear what you're doing and then having a vision for what you want it to be.
hmm,
And then in going about, scratching and digging for where things can be cut or pushed to move some air.
yeah,
Because ultimately, um, anything that comes to me, I'm assuming people like it. So you didn't think it was overcompressed.
hmm,
You thought it was cool.
right,
So there's an element of that density that you want. So I don't have to go very far from what you approved to make it more sexy on a punch level.
yeah,
And I wouldn't want to go too far. Well, you physically you can't, but
right,
but if you can get any punch out of it, and you could actually get quite a bit of punch out of things that people would think are completely trash.
hmm,
There's a lot I could do here, but it doesn't take much. So I could actually go too far
yeah,
with it. And people are like, well, where's the feeling?
right,
It had a vibe, right? It had a vibe, and it doesn't. Well, you
right,
just cleaned it up too much.
right,
So it's always about respecting that whatever was sent was like, well, you thought that was cool. So what's not cool about it to me is about monitoring. It's about skill, but your intention is there. Again, intentions
hmm,
matter.
yeah,
It's all about passing on the intentions from step to step. I'm picking up the baton and being like, okay, this is what you thought was cool. What can we do to make this more punchy? What can we do to maybe we'll pop that vocal a little bit because it's like super buried, even though this is a song where the vocal would never be on top, but I'm going to make that a little cleaner. Maybe I'll do a little mid-side EQ where I'll just pop the mid and the vocal at 1K
yeah,
and do anything with the side, or maybe I'll just cut the side EQ down in the low mids or pull out the sides, or who knows. There's a million things you can do. You
yeah,
just have to go about it like not like science project, not like it's about make things perfect or even, but it's a music project. It's about how do we make this thing more musical? What does more musical mean?
right,
It's going to be punchy. It's going to have dynamic flow. It's going to have a vocal that's in the right place for the style, et cetera,
sure.
et cetera, et cetera. So
Okay, I've got two quick fire questions for you. So these are going to be like one sentence answers, and this first one's
okay,
pretty funny.
one
Okay,
sentence.
all right. So this is David Francolini
David.
asks, what is the perfect time for poaching an egg? And or wait, I'm sorry. How long is the optimum time to poach an egg, and does the relationship with the egg affect the poaching? Quick fire.
Uh, yes, you need to have a nice organic egg, preferably from David's local farm there in his beautiful part of the world, and you poach it for the right amount of time.
Perfect answer. All right. Next one. EQ before compression or compression before EQ?
Um, I EQ before compression in my analog chain,
Mm-hmm.
and I EQ after compression. So I
So yes.
EQ sort of the fixie stuff beforehand
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want to send a mess into a compressor and make it more of a mess.
Yeah.
So all the um, sort of this is not 100% true, but let's for the sake of argument, most of the fixing kind of EQs are before compression,
Mm-hmm.
and then the enhancing EQs are after. The broad stroke, the Fairman in my chain.
Yeah.
So I start with a digital EQ, which is now a Pro Q2, and then I've got a Focusrite clean EQ. Then I've got compression. Then I've got Fairman to do like beautiful sort of tubey enhancement stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I do a digital compressor, like I mentioned on that previous example, um, that's is it before or after? I don't even know. It didn't matter too much, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it was after the digital EQ. So for me, it's before
Yeah.
the EQ is before the compression,
Cool.
except the enhancing kind of tubey thing, which is after.
Right.
That
Yeah.
that chain layout is part of it's part of again what's more important. What's more important is the overview, is the sonic sort of awesomeness of the result. So everybody's just got to experiment. Don't listen to me. Don't do what I do. Do what you do.
Mm-hmm.
What do you hear in your mind is the awesome result, and start playing with things to get there.
Yeah.
A B everything, switch everything around. That's what matters.
Yeah.
What I do works for me. It's not going to matter for you, because you can't follow anybody really.
Yeah.
You can follow up to a point. We can learn from other people up to a point, but it has to be your thing in the end. So
Yeah. Kind of. This is interesting. So the chat rooms, they're like a minute or two behind us, but Glenn O'Donohue just put in the chat word of the day, intent, and I was actually thinking, I wish I had a giant graphic to pop up intent everywhere, and that just it keeps on coming up with everything that you're talking about: LUFS, compression, EQ before compression, all of this stuff, poaching an
yeah,
egg.
yeah. I mean, there's just a lot of ways to go about the day, but the intentful way is really, to me, the only way you're going to get anything done.
Mm-hmm.
So having monitoring, it's not sexy, but to me, monitoring is the most sexy thing, because if you can't hear what's going on,
Yeah.
your intent is completely muted by what you can hear.
Yeah.
Right? You could have the greatest ideas ever, but if you can't do them in the room, you're screwed.
Right.
So yes, intent matters. Monitoring matters before intent.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I sat down and said, "Wow, this mix is amazing. Let's do a record. This record's amazing. This artist is famous and huge. This mixer is like, wow, he or she has just done all this stuff."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to be respectful, and I'm going to be careful, and I'm going to not upset anybody, and I'm going to make sure it's loud enough with my LUFS, and I'm going to do the tips and tails to the standard 1 point something seconds and 2 on the ballads. And if this was my intent, then I'd be somebody else,
Right.
because that's just how you make boring shit.
Mm-hmm.
The intent has to be musical enhancement. The intent has to be connection from this artist to one person. Now, sure, we'd love it to be 10 million people, but 10
Mm-hmm.
million people starts with one person. So yeah, first monitoring, then intent, and everything is pretty much downhill from there.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue. We were going to go to the online mastering thing, but I'm going to skip ahead and let's just go right to acoustics. Is that cool?
Sure,
All right.
whatever you want to do.
All right. So this question comes from Hyphen in Taiwan. And Hyphen says, "Hi, Brian. As you stated in your amazing tutorial, the room is such an indispensable tool for mastering engineers. While most of the people might not have access to an acoustically qualified space, may I know your opinion on mastering on headphones?"
Yeah, so um, mastering on headphones is not really mastering, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You can produce a record on headphones. Certainly, there's some amazing in-ears that you can get as well. Headphone wise, I like the kind of the high mid-priced Sennheisers. I think it's like the 600s or the 650s, or but it's like whatever works. The problem is in mastering, when you put on the headphones, you eliminate the real world room reflections, and you eliminate the imaging, really, because even the headphones that have they've moved the driver down, like Ultrasone used to do this, other people do it, where you get kind of this image. It's not really the same. So to me, mastering on headphones is just not. It's really not possible. I couldn't do anything on headphones.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do you
the
ever use
reason
them when you're mastering to reference things or
Not really. I have some
sources?
really killer headphones with a fancy cable I like, and I barely put them on.
Yeah.
Um, no. Um, Again, the room represents the world, right? If it sounds good in a room, it'll always be good on the headphones.
Mm-hmm.
But good on the headphones isn't always good in a room.
Yeah.
And we're mastering for a physical world where things bounce. And the image in the room is so key because of the mid-side power balancing things that I touched on in I think did we touch on it in the
Yep.
video? We did.
Yeah.
Okay.
And monitor
Yeah.
placement.
Yeah, monitor placement stuff. So, the power of music down the middle, if we're talking pop music, kicks, snares, vocals, some kind of lead instrument, that's most of what matters emotionally in terms of the initial sort of connection to the music. The width of the music is where the spice, the excitement, the composition of pans and faders comes in, because mono gets to be kind of boring unless you're doing an old sounding thing, and then mono's the thing, and then there's a lot of excitement that happens in a mono situation. But for most people working in a stereo world and doing a more modern sound, the mono basis is really still huge, and then the relationship to the sides is huge. And so for mastering, part of what I'm doing is playing with that mid-side power balance so that the essential emotional connection happens down the middle.
Mm-hmm.
It's where the kick and the bass and the snare and the vocal and the basic lead instrument or the basic harmonic thing, it's where those things live. And then the side thing can't be overwhelming where it kills the middle, but it has to be as big as possible to be exciting.
Yeah.
So that relationship is not possible on headphones. You're just really you're guessing in a way I wouldn't do it. You'd be better off to take your room and just bass trap every single corner, wall, ceiling, every corner, and then get a monitor that is not putting out too much low end for your situation.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be better to guess on some of the low end things, or maybe use your headphones to maybe listen to just low end, which is more centered, and to hear low end relationships. You could do that with headphones, but have a room for everything else. So I just I'm thinking out loud, as I often do. I think you could do headphones for dealing with some of the low end and low mid issues because they're mono.
Yeah.
But that would be 30% or 20% or 10%. The rest of the time, just get a room and some monitors that are more suited to the scale of the room.
Yeah.
and get your mid-side set up right in the room, get your power balance right, so that you can really enhance things musically.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, cool. Next to another question here. Okay, this one comes from Ruben in Cordoba, Argentina. And Ruben says, "Hello, Brian. I would like to know more about your monitoring system. At what distance do you have the speakers on your walls, back and side? At what linear distance, left and right, are you sitting the master? How did you decide you needed a vacuum tube power amp for monitoring? Sure, you've tried many. What's the difference you could hear between vacuum tube and solid state? Thank you very much for the reply. Greetings from Argentina, Ruben." So
No,
let's just break this up. Why
yeah,
don't you talk a little about your placement and then about amps?
it's a lot. So what matters in the question is in the room. It's about a 7 foot distance and a 7 or 8 feet across. I'm in a 7 or 8 foot triangle ish. My tweeters are aimed sort of past my head because that works for the balance.
Mm-hmm.
How close is it to the walls? None of that really matters. Partly, I'm not being evasive or difficult, but this room isn't really a normal room because, well, it wouldn't matter anyway, but this room has freestanding walls to treat frequencies, but it's sort of like it's Real Trap's 6-inch little walls that are freestanding and kind of like kind of a concrete, sort of almost like a basement kind of situation. It's not a basement. So, you know, what's going on in my room with dimensions there, it doesn't really matter to you. You know, you want to move things left and right and front to back. Your left and right's probably going to, if you're throwing the long way in the room, you're probably going to get some low mid things here. If you go front to back, you're probably going to get some low end changes. And I'm talking, I mean, in my room, sometimes it's like I recently made some changes to my speakers. I had the crossovers rebuilt with external crossovers with some really expensive parts that'll last for 100 years. So I had to move the speaker to kind of get the frequency balance and the power balance back. And I taped off where they were, and they ended up being, they moved about a 3/4 of an inch closer, and they were towed out, maybe a ½ inch towed out. So you know, small movements like that can make all the difference. Mm-hmm. So let's see. We answered this question. 7 or 8 feet triangle in my room. Doesn't matter the side walls. It doesn't matter. That answer would never matter. You know, you have to play with that. Yeah. What matters is what you're listening for when you play with it, and what you're listening for is a mid-side power balance that's appropriate, and by appropriate I mean just about the same amount of mid to side based on the reference material. That varies a little bit. Sometimes the mid's a little more forward, sometimes the side's a little more forward, but there should be a kind of a thing there. And we've started to talk about it. I think we're going to talk about it more in the future. Yeah. But yeah, that it's again, it's your intent. It's what you're listening for. It's not where you could end up 3 inches from the wall. You could, I mean, who knows where you end up. Mm-hmm. That doesn't matter. It matters that that your intention is to get a good mid-side power balance and a good frequency balance top to bottom, and you know, whatever you have to do, wherever they have to go, that's where it should be. Tubes in solid state. You know, I had back in the day, Thomas Barefoot was making speakers in his apartment or his house, I forget which he had, and we were friends on the forums, and his technical prowess impressed me, and I didn't like the monitoring I had, and so I sent him a check for like $7,000, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And 9 months later, he sent me one of the first pair of Barefoot speakers that was ever made, and it was a front firing 12-inch with two, and the tweet, you know, it was the same sort of 2 mids and tweeter and the depth leader with the front firing 12, and on the back he had like a 4B SST strapped on, and it was broken out into with active or passive or both kind of crossovers. And that was the last speaker I had before I went to these. These are traditional kind of 3 three-way hi-fi speaker, a tower.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to show us this?
Yeah,
Or did
sure.
it spin around?
Um, do, like that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see that?
Yeah. Yep. Perfect.
And they're on some like concrete patio blocks, and then there's a 2-inch piece of maple,
Mm-hmm.
and then some real fancy feet at the bottom.
Mm-hmm. And was that a height thing or an isolation or both?
Both,
Mm-hmm.
both. And you can see the tweeter has a little shiny metal center to it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see that?
Yep.
And it's a paper mid and then aluminum drivers and bottom.
Cool.
So I went to these after having Thomas's original kind of MM12 or whatever they were. I had those for 3 or 4 years, and that was before barefoot was a thing. And told my friend Teddy to invest, and they've done great with Finish King and all that. But I got tired of the sound of those speakers because again, the intent differs. So like
Mm-hmm.
Thomas is a brilliant guy, and I love him. He's a great guy, but he doesn't hear cable tone, and he doesn't really have any interest in dynamic drivers. And I wanted more dynamics from my driver,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted a tweeter that was just more refined and had more air and wasn't in the in the sandwich of the mids. And so I moved towards this sort of traditional mastering setup, lows on the bottom, highs on the top.
Mm-hmm.
And I was drawn to this speaker because Joachim Gerhardt, this sort of brilliant German, had been making hi-fi speakers, but they appealed to a lot of audio folks, I found out. And I found out later, but the main appeal to me was that the tweeter was a combination of I think it's a titanium dome, but with a cloth surround.
Mm-hmm.
So the low end of the tweeter is actually cloth, which is a very familiar sound, and the high end of the tweeter is metal, and that's on paper really the best. But I've never liked metal tweeters because of the low end of the tweeter. So it eliminated a problem that I've had with metal tweeters by being kind of a 2-part tweeter. It sort of makes it a 4-way. There's
Mm-hmm.
low mid, there's like a low high and a high high, if
Mm-hmm.
you will. The tweeter has the composite. So I was drawn to this line firstly because of the tweeter, and also because I wanted a traditional, lows on the bottom, highs on top sound. And I tried a bunch of solid state amps, and there are, a lot of great solid state amps out there. Amps are so different. It's a fun, crazy world to play in. I experimented with tube amps because I wanted something that was less analytical and a little more human. And then I found that, well, with tubes, it's also a huge world. There's single-ended triodes. There's push-pull, kind of Class A, Class AB. There's stuff that's fuzzy. There's stuff that's clear but focuses on the mid-range, has no low power. There's a million tube amps, and there's a million intentions and designs and quality of design. So I found my way to a guy named Jeff Glowacki at Sonicraft down in Texas. And Jeff is a genius electrical engineer who also has great ears. So his day gig is selling component parts. And Jeff ended up upgrading for me a tube amp that at the time I could afford, and I think it was like a $1,300 used amp. It was a Carry Rocket 88, which I have upstairs for TV and vinyl now. And I put maybe $600 worth of Jeff's upgrades in it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is him reading the schematic and then talking to me, and I said to him, here's what I want. I listened to this past Labs amp that I really liked, but I didn't like this about it. And I listened to this Threshold amp, and I listened to this. And so I gave him sort of my taste and told him, what I had, and he's able to look at the schematic and figure out what needs to happen. And he's really good at this. I think he's the only person in the world that has both the EE skill and the musician kind of listening skill.
Mm-hmm.
And he's really kind of an amazing guy. So if you ever want, I'll put a plug in for Jeff. If you ever want to buy some component parts, he sells diodes. He's got the sound of resistors down. you know.
Hmm.
He doesn't bother going online and arguing cables with anybody. But if you're ever on the phone with him, he'll give you an hour on it if he's
Yeah.
got the time, and
Yeah.
it'll just blow your mind. Um, so anyway,
One more time, where can people find him? I'm sure some people are pulling up Google right now.
it's Sonic Craft.
Cool.
He's a parts seller,
Hmm.
so it's just like a parts store. Caps, um, diodes, resistors. I don't think he sells wire, but
Hmm.
anyway, so so basically, there's the best solid state amps sound like tubes, and the best tube amps sound like solid state. That's
Hmm.
my opinion. There's this middle ground where you get accuracy, but you also get beauty. And what I like about, I'm now on my third tube amp since that era. And what I like about it is that there is again, a focus on musicality. So there's a palpable image. I consider it like a maybe 4 foot deep image. It doesn't go back forever,
Hmm.
and and it's not like the ultimate in control on low end, but it's that balance between solid state and tube. That's really
Hmm.
what you want. So there's a solid state amp that I've been looking at. It's been around for a few years. That's the Dart Zeal. It's like the 108, and it's 25. Maybe they're $40,000 at this point.
Oof.
Um, and if you're into that amp, what you would say is it sounds very much like a great tube amp, but it has really great control on the low end that solid state can do. So, and then my tube amps now, which are a very modified carry audio sort of, I upgraded from the Rocket to the V12R, and then to these 211 FEs, and then Jeff and I did capacitors and some couple resistors and key components. So it's again that 3D realism, but as linear as you can get it.
Yeah.
Again, it's somewhere between tube and solid state is where you want to be.
Hmm.
Uh,
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
again,
a whole rabbit hole.
it's about intent. A lot of
Yeah.
people in my profession use the Class D, and I love the efficiency of Class D, but I don't like the sound of it, and I don't like the way it makes me think.
Hmm.
My monitoring is set up to be technically sufficient and musically advantageous,
Yeah.
meaning it shows me when things are becoming more musical and when they're becoming less musical within a range which is technically uh, very clear.
Yeah.
So again, it's about intent.
Well,
It's not perfectionism
yeah.
in mastering. It's not the perfect amp. It's not the spec of the thing. I mean, those things, you look at those, but you have to listen, and you have to see how they work in a palette, in a chain.
Yeah. Let's say that somebody, they want to look deeper into this. When you were kind of figuring all this stuff out, trying out different amps, what led you to try this out? Go searching for, maybe I want a tube amp while I'm mastering, or and where could somebody start? Where would you recommend?
Well, everything has to start with being dissatisfied.
Hmm.
So if you're satisfied with what you have, then do nothing,
Yeah.
right? If you have to think about what you're dissatisfied about, don't do that.
Yeah.
Right. You want to get to being dissatisfied, whether it be a microphone or a compressor or monitoring or your room. It all starts with being annoyed with what you have
Yeah.
and feeling that it's insufficient. And then the question is, well, what is it about it that's not right? And that's your frame of reference is where you are. And then in your mind, you have a vision of where you want to be. And then it's a question of getting from A to B.
Hmm.
So the answer to that is always, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
Don't mess with things until they bother you, and when they bother you, address what bothers you based on where you are. You're always improving. You're always rolling the rock down the hill.
Yep.
You don't want to just sit home at night and say, "Gee, what if I changed everything?"
Hmm.
Like, well, if you changed everything, you'd kind of be starting over. It'd be better to just change the things that need to be changed with the basis of the experience that you have on the things that you know work.
Yeah.
That's what you're looking to do.
Right.
And eventually you get to a place where the tools are cool, and
Yeah.
then go with that, and then make music.
Yep.
And then if that bothers you eventually, then you're going to have to change tools, right?
Right.
So I have the same chain I've had for a long time, but I have upgraded amps, DA, speaker, crossovers, subtle upgrades along the same path. Same crossover design, better parts.
Yeah.
Same company, better amp from that company.
Yeah.
You know, that's where you go. You just start with being dissatisfied.
Right.
Being an artist, being effective in an artistic career is about being able to intelligently problem solve dissatisfaction. You know, perpetual dissatisfaction is miserable, and a lot of people fall into despair in an artistic life because they're always dissatisfied. They can't suffer cheerfully. They can't find a way to live with dissatisfaction. But living with dissatisfaction is actually the trick. Harnessing dissatisfaction is how we upgrade anything. And so, you know, no matter what you're doing, your question or any question, the question to yourself is, am I happy? If I'm not happy, what do I need to get from here to here? And then you go about trying things.
Yeah.
And there's always compromises, and you try to figure out what's the best compromise. You know, what moves things forward the most and back the least, based on the frame of reference of, well, I know I'm here. I know what this is. But this is good, but this sucks because in my mind I want it to be this. You know, so maybe we get to here.
Yeah. That's a great answer, Ben. Let's do one more on acoustics here.
Okay.
Okay. Oops. Sorry. Actually, we are out of acoustic questions. Let's do. How are you on time? It's 3:40.
I'm good. You know, whatever you want to do.
Let's maybe see a couple more, and then we'll call it a day. So live chat room. If you guys have any questions, now's your chance. And we'll do a pre-submitted one. So this is on workflow, and this is from Tiago in Portugal. He says, "Hello, Brian. What's your basic workflow normally in the first hour of a mastering session for a full-length album? Thank you."
Yeah. So I think we're going to get into that in the course next year. I bring up the files and lay them out. I do a quick listen to the mixes, skipping quickly with the cursor. You know, maybe an intro, maybe the loudest section. I do tips and tails real quick, just trim them up. I'm listening 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds snippets. Just boom, boom, okay, boom, boom, okay, boom, boom, next song, boom, boom, okay. Intro, maybe, outro, maybe, loudest part, maybe. What that looks like, you know, visually, maybe that's a chorus, let's listen to that. So I'm kind of skipping through with the cursor, getting a sense of what this music is, what the production values are, what the variation is between the tracks, doing the tips and the tails, grabbing the volume up and down. I work in Sequoia, so you can very quickly do some volume changes just with the mixes as they sit. Just starting to kind of, you know, it's like a sculpture. You're starting to get a feel for the edges of it and trying to see what it's trying to be in their mind, and then also in my mind. You know, what do I think they're intending? What do I think is possible? And then starting the kind of technical work of balancing out levels, and you know, if 7 of them are really cool, and I come across one that's like a real, you know, stinker, I might just throw all the digital EQs on there with the Pro Q2. I might start doing some digital EQing right away. I work quickly, meaning not like in a hurry. There's no rush to it, but I'm always trying to stay fresh. I want to always be listening like it's the first time that I've heard it, because that's how you're going to hear it.
Yeah.
So I'm always quick. Again, not rushing. There's no tension. There's no sense of speed intended, but I'm listening just long enough to learn what I need to learn with that cursor in that place, and then moving on. So it's going to be track layout, tips and tails, volume, some digital EQ, getting a sense of what they're doing, starting to do some digital things, and then at a certain point, I'll turn to the analog desk and I'll bring in some more kind of, big picture juicy EQs, maybe compression, hopefully not. Get the level kind of up, start getting the level up where I think it can go, and start listening to that compromise of where level starts to be a musical negative, and then it just kind of, it evolves from there. It goes back and forth. I go, I might change the analog setting after going back to the digital, and it goes back and forth. So the first hour, I mean, if it's the first hour could be the last hour if it's a really well done thing, or the first hour could be, I just kind of do it enough to kick it out, and I might run a print of it, and then I'll come back to it later.
Yeah.
I'll come back to it in 4 hours, or I'll come back to it tonight or tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I might, within an hour, I might print something that I send out, or within an hour, I might just print a kind of a first draft for myself that I'm going to come back and look at.
Yeah.
I always come back to it with the fresh ears. I always come back to it saying, is this all that it can be?
Yeah.
And that moment again isn't about perfectionism. It's about that 90% level where the music has momentum.
I have a question kind of stemming off of that. Could you talk a little bit? I know a little bit about this from knowing you, but could you talk a little bit about how you decide your work day, like what your day looks like when you work?
Well, I'm on the one hand, being self-employed means you get to set your schedule. On the other hand, it means you're always working.
Yeah.
And you're always at the mercy of your client and what they need. So my work day is usually wake up and do a quick check of emails, make sure nothing's on fire, and there's no problems that need to be addressed right away. And then during the day is some admin time, some communication with my assistant, Kate, who's in Ohio, and we might Skype, or we just communicate through Google Docs. We have like a to-do list.
Yeah.
So we might text a little, or we might go through that, and it tends to be revisions and notes and touch-ups during the day, and it tends to be more like new material, creativity, quote unquote, fresh work, more in the evening. But that varies. It's not a hard and fast thing.
Yeah.
The main thing again is that there are no children in the house. My stepson is married and 24, and so I have the luxury of having a very organic day. So unless there's some life thing that has to happen, if it's an open day, I can really schedule the day around just kind of going with the flow of what needs to happen for the client, and then what needs to happen so that I'm in the best place to be fresh and to be efficient. There's no point in working for hours on end if you could do it in 20 minutes and have it be a better result.
Right.
And so figuring that out is kind of a lifelong pursuit. But for me, because I do work unattended, and I have a lot of experience with myself in the production chair, in the mixing chair, in the artist chair. I kind of know how to read my own when I'm in my best energy.
Yeah.
And if it gets to be late at night, I might set up tomorrow's session. So I know I don't have the overview clarity, or I'm sort of in the weeds a little bit, but I can still bring up files and do what we talked about in the first hour.
Yeah.
I could lay out an EP, or I could lay out a record, or I could lay out 5 singles and get them ready to go.
Yeah.
Get them into a session, get them named, get the Dropbox folder named, throw the digital EQ on the file, and not really do any work per se, because that first impression is important, and having that fresh energy is important. That's That's what people are paying me for.
Yeah.
They're paying me for my best effort,
Hmm.
not my most effort, not my uh, you know uh, you know just the being in the best place that I can be in.
Yeah.
So when I'm actually doing the work, not the touch up revision kind of stuff, but doing the main work, I'm just looking to get in that place when those moments arise.
Yeah.
And you don't always get the luxury of it being super organic, but I try to keep it that way.
Hmm. Yeah. That's
People can be brilliant for 10 minutes and then they can suck for 10 hours. I
right.
mean, we're all capable of that.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You were saying.
No, no, that's just it's one thing that I've learned from you from talking to you over the years is it's about being kind to yourself and being aware of when those moments are coming and when they're not there.
There's like a certain kind of like frat boy hazing tradition thing with studios that I reject.
Hmm.
I'm not big on frat culture. I'm not big on beating yourself into the ground
Hmm.
to prove anything to other people or to yourself. I've done that. We all do that. We go through stages of that. But my thing is about being in the best place to do the best work,
Hmm.
and knowing what that is takes some time, but it's very helpful to sort that out because you're much more efficient and your life is better.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than working on something for an hour or 6 hours or 8 hours or 2 weeks or 3 years and listening to it later and being like, damn, that sucks. That's the worst.
A little bit of a bummer. Yeah.
It's a real bummer. So, you know, that's what we're trying to avoid. And the
Hmm.
way we avoid that is by getting to know when we're in the best place to work and then working with the obvious confines and restrictions that life has.
Yeah.
You have a job, you have to do it in the evening. If you have a client, you have to do it right now.
Hmm.
There are times that I'm not wanting to get out of bed at 2 in the morning and there's something that has to happen and I'll get out of bed and go do it.
Yeah.
And there are times that I wake up in the morning and I would like to go enjoy the day and there's something that has to be done right now. So
Yep.
that happens too.
Hmm.
But ideally just being able to be in the best place to do the best work in the least amount of time, that's a win for everybody.
Yep.
If I work on your record for 8 hours or an hour and a half, it doesn't matter. It matters that it's amazing to you.
Right.
And so I've got to figure out how to make that happen.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. All right. Let's do another workflow one here.
Workflow.
And all right. Let's see. So this comes from Mike in Paris, France. Hi, Brian. First of all, thanks for your work. You're helping the world to be a bit more beautiful. So my
Oh,
question is
that's
it
very sweet.
possible, like a famous beardman does in the mix world, to master 100% in the box? And if so, could you explain which tools are used and if it's the same approach than mastering in analog, as mastering in analog?
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about this last night for some reason. Maybe I intuited your French question. Um, yeah, of course, it's possible. I mean, do I want to do it? No, because I'm really relying on and enjoying the analog artifacts.
Hmm.
Uh, Digital is never the same. It's just not. The analog can actually add something, whereas digital kind of goes sideways in a good way at best. It goes sideways in an additive way, but it's not what I would consider like true additive kind of quality. So, but this is the world we're in, so I'm not going to snobbily sit here and be like, hey, you're screwed. If that's what you can do, then that's what you do. I mean, all I can suggest for how to go about doing that is to kind of start with the basics of mastering, which is monitoring and the room, which is
Hmm.
huge. Okay, that's a huge component. The bigger component is that you're a mastering mindseted person, that you have the mindset to see a vision for work where you are perpetually dissatisfied and you know what to do to enhance mixes. right? So you have to enhance mixes that are not so good, music that is not so great. You have to enhance things that are really great and great artists, and there has to be the mindset to enhance. So that's the first thing, really. You got
Mm-hmm.
to have that vision, that intention, that kind of taste, or that kind of overview perspective. Then you've got to have a great room, and you can make a room great that shouldn't be a $500,000 or $150,000 build. You don't have to spend $150,000 on a room. A lot of people do that. It's impressive. It's beautiful. It doesn't matter. Results matter. Now the physics of a room do matter though. Physics is real. You can't get over physics with ego. You can't get past physics with good intentions. But you can find a middle ground. So in your room, you can bass trap everything. You can kill some first reflections. You can get the best monitoring for your room size and for your brain, so that the monitoring reflects what you hear. You can set things up in the room so that you've got the mid to the side power balance. All of that stuff you can do with any equipment. Okay. Moving on to the equipment, again, I have no desire in not in working digitally, and I have spares of my things, and I spend a lot of time planning for a future with this equipment. But if you're starting out, you know, I would say just some basic things. You know, you need like a clean EQ, like the FabFilter Pro Q2 is a nice clean EQ. You need some kind of color stuff. The color stuff could be whatever you want it to be, color EQs, some color compression, and some kind of clean compression. So some clean EQ, some clean compression, some color EQ, some color compression. And then I would say start listening to limiters, plug in limiters, and think about stacking them.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get too much out of any one limiter. You know, just like we can stack compression in production, you can stack limiters. I stack limiters here.
Yeah.
I clip a converter. I do a dB.5 with the L2, and I do a little crane song head, you know, a little harmonic enhancement stuff. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, stack some limiters and work in the box. But the main things aren't the equipment. You know, the main things are you and your room, and how you listen to music, how you interpret, what you focus on, and what you can, you know, the kind of courage that you can have to know when to push something and go far with it, or at the same time, at the same time, the respect that you show
Mm-hmm.
for what's there. It's a very tricky balance. That's the hardest part of mastering. It's understanding that respect and sort of disrespect exist at the same time, and you have to know when to push and when to lay off. That's the hardest part, and that's
Yeah.
got nothing to do with equipment.
Right. Very good. Uh, so let's see. It's getting close to 1 year time, I think. So there's a couple questions in the live chat room that are asking about how you charge and for your services, and one is asking, do you charge differently for clients based on their budget, majors or indie artists? Do you want to touch on some of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to promote too
Yeah.
much here, but I'll just say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, send me an email.
Mm-hmm.
Kate or I will get back to you. Yes, I do price on a scale,
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Cool. Um,
and I do all the work, but I price on a scale. You
yeah.
know, money's a fluid thing. If you have $10 million, it's a very different life than if you have $1,500 to your name.
Yeah.
So money is a relative thing, and I price in a relative way.
Awesome. Great answer. Cool. Let me just take a look here. Let's do one more workflow question and then we'll wrap it up. Sound good?
And you skipped over. You were going to talk about the robots too.
Yeah, let's do it. We'll do that one.
That was last year's hot topic. This year
Yeah.
LUFS. Last year robots. Well, we'll do robots.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Paul from Dayton, Ohio asks, how reliable and professional are the online mastering services like Lander and eMastered?
Okay, so the robots. So you know, Dayton, home of some great funk music. My home state of Ohio, some great music. I recently saw that the Zap Band was like the #1 funk song of all time. Although Parliament would be in there too. A lot of Parliament, George
Mhm.
Clinton. Anyway, some Ohio love there. Um, what was the question again? Sorry.
So it is, let me read again. It
Oh yeah, the
is
online services.
how
Okay.
reliable and professional is the question, but probably an overview would be
How
great.
reliable and professional?
Hmm.
Well, there's certainly nothing more reliable and professional than a robot, right? They're very reliable and they're very professional.
Hmm.
The question is, are they musical? Are they smart for you? Are they going to move your music forward? Are they going to move your career forward? Are they going to make you happy?
Hmm.
Those are the questions really that you might ask. They're definitely reliable and professional. Put your track in, you get your track back, you pay your money, and somebody pays taxes. I
Yeah.
mean that's professional. So, but what's really happening with the robots, if you look at it through my lens, is that they all sound bad because they all are taking the humanity out of the music. They all sound like they were done by a robot. Now, why on earth would you, as a human being, put all this time, care, love, energy, money, sweat equity into creating, recording, making a million choices, and then at the end hand it to a robot?
Hmm.
Why is that a bad thing? Because the intrinsic energy of the robot is not musical. You might get lucky on the switching between one of the 4 presets for the EQ, or you might like the level, or you might just get lucky on the presentation, and you might say to yourself, "Oh, well that sounds better than my mix."
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm not going to argue with you. If you think it sounds better than your mix, then it sounds better than your mix.
Hmm.
But if I listen to it, I always think it sounds like shit because it feels like it was done by a machine, because there was no actual choice made
Hmm.
in the moment. When I'm working on a song, I might break up verses and choruses and EQ them differently. I might play with Master Fader after you've played with it, and you might not even know it, but I've done a little push into the chorus to give it some juice. I might do a mid-side thing that just barely pops the vocal only in the verse, never in the chorus, and you wouldn't know that, but you're like, oh, that's better. Well, the robot doesn't do any of that. The online mastering is robot mastering, and they do not think.
Hmm.
They just process based on a flexible algorithm. And no matter how flexible the algorithm becomes, no matter how many parameters you can go in there and tweak, none of these are in the moment emotionally reactive decisions that enhance the musical content. They just make it sound professional
Yeah.
and reliable and ignorable to me. That is ignorable. And being ignorable is the last thing you want to be.
Hmm.
You'd rather have a mix that was kind of whacked, that was musically jumpy and exciting and sounded a little broken, but was like, that's kind of cool. Work for Snoop Dogg, you know, could work for you. So you want the warts in it. You want the humanity in it. You want to do everything to not come across like a 20-year-old or 12-year-old kid with a box making beats and putting a lyric on it.
Yeah.
You want to do everything you can to not sound like marketing with a beat. And that's what generic music comes across as. It just sounds like marketing with a beat. Like you're trying to sell me this song.
Hmm.
That's not what people want. They want to be connected to an authentic artist. An authentic artistry connection comes through people like me listening and enhancing the humanity of the music, not just making it loud and getting lucky with the EQ curve. That's so not what mastering is.
Yeah.
And it's disturbing to me when I see professional mastering engineers aligning themselves with these services, because they are defaming and defeating the intention of mastering, which apparently they don't have. I'm just going to put it out there, not naming names, but if you're backing this sort of stuff, you're not a mastering engineer. You're a businessman,
Hmm.
straight up. That's as cold-blooded as I'm going to get in this. So the robots are just dehumanizing all this humanity that you've been working your ass off to get. And
Yeah.
yes, if you think it's nice, I'm not going to say it's not, but I'm asking you this: what might you be missing out on? You only get one chance at a first impression.
Mm-hmm.
And when you listen to it in 30 years, you're going to have a feeling about the memory and the song. And my intent is to make both of those really positive things.
Mm-hmm.
A strong first impression, a funny anecdote, an artist that I worked with, famous artist, I did 3 or 4 songs with the idea of doing a record. And the artist was on tour, and they rented a studio in Nashville and just stopped into a random studio that they didn't know and popped in 3 or 4 of these tracks that I had done and listened for like 5 seconds to each one. And the artist turned to the band and was like, yeah, that's the guy. We want to hire that guy. So one of the people in the band called me later and was like, I'm kind of nervous about this because the artist only listened for like 5 seconds to each of these songs.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to know more about you, and I looked up your website, and you look great. And he was very gracious, and we had this hour-long talk because he was uncomfortable with that kind of intuitive response. And I said, look, 5 seconds is all you get in a lot of cases. And if your boss thought I was worthy to hire in 5 seconds, I'm good with that because I know it's going to be good in 5 years. I know it's going to be 50 years. But that first impression is huge. And the whole thing of like, working with a robot that's also destructive is you start mixing for the robot.
Right.
You start in your head thinking, well, the last time I did this, I used that robot and it made it do that. And so I'm going to do this that way. And to me, this is totally, totally wrong. Super bad idea. Mixers should never be thinking about what the mastering person is going to do, and certainly not thinking about what the robot is going to do. Don't even think about what I'm going to do. Someone who's worked with me for 5 records, I would say to them, I don't have to, but hypothetically for this conversation, I would say, hey, don't worry about me. You want to make one great song. Then you want to make another great song on its own. Then you make a third great song on its own. Don't worry about them tying together. That's my job. Don't worry about what I'm going to do. Don't make the snare louder because the last idiot screwed up your snare. Don't make the vocal quiet because the last robot turned up your vocal. You need to do everything you can to make a great mix in every way possible except the overall volume.
Yeah.
And if it's pop, the overall volume might be really close too, because there could be limiters added, some bus compression limiting. There could be all kinds of limiting and compression built into that mix, but it might still need like a dB.
Right.
Or in some cases, I might bring something down. Sometimes I bring something down. Some of the records that I've done with a mixer well known for 4 limiters, sometimes I'll bring something down and make it seem a little more dynamic to flow with the other songs. So
yeah.
So just as a mixer, it's not in your interest to give your future over to a robot.
Yeah.
It's anti-musical. It's very I hear energy in music. That's what I do. And when I hear any robot pass, it just sounds quite dead to me. It sounds very, very dull.
There were a ton of questions that came in that had the same vein of, should I compress? You really hit a nerve there with the people sending things with the snare up a dB or 2 because they know you're going to do something that'll take it down because they heard that somewhere that mastering engineers do that, so they make the vocal louder.
Yes.
And I've had a lot of great experiences with you talking about this too, but most of those questions were, do I apply bus compression? Do I apply limiting? Do I turn the snare up, the vocal up? And yeah, I mean, you kind of just answered all of that, but I don't know if you have anything else to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, here's the bottom line. You listen to reference material that's in your genre. It's going to show frequency balance layout, dynamics layout, vocal layout, low end, high end, bass, kick, all. It's going to, if you've got some good refs that are in your ballpark, all you have to do is turn them down. Put them in your session, turn them down a little bit, whatever a little bit means, turn them down a lot. Turn them down so that they're working with where your session is sitting. Your session is the priority, not the refs, okay? Not the mastering engineer, not the next step. Your session is the main priority. You are the main priority.
Mm-hmm.
Your work is going to make this happen at your stage because that's where the production is, right? So we want your plug-in levels to be good. We want your compression. Maybe you limit the two bus, but maybe you limit just the vocal. Maybe you limit just the kick drum track. Who knows what you do with a limiter?
Mm-hmm.
All of that. Maybe you do no limiting. A lot of people have mixed for a long time with no limiters. It's certainly doable. You've got master fader automation. You've got individual fader automation. There are too many tools right now. There are too many choices, and you don't have to use them all.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to get your mix to be sounding and feeling and moving as close as you can get it to your target with your target level turned down. Just take level off the table.
Yeah.
Completely. Bring in your refs, bring them down, and work to do everything else that you can
Mm-hmm.
to get towards those refs. Do everything except level. I don't care how you get there. You'll have to decide because every style is different and every track set that comes in has their own set of, weirdnesses,
Yeah.
So, how you get there doesn't matter. Just get as close as you can in every way except the volume to comparable tracks that are in your genre, in your wheelhouse.
Yeah. That's great. Okay. Last question, and I'm gonna take this from the chat room here. So I'm gonna add a little bit onto this too. So Peter Castle asks, mastering for 1970s styles of soul and pop, what are the best attack ratio and release settings? And what I want to add to that is he's obviously going for a certain vibe that's a genre and has a tone to it. You probably know what that is from that description. Do you have any tips for him on how to achieve that sound? And I'm sure he's referencing some of your work with, Black Keys and. So.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's never, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there is no answer for this except to listen and turn the knobs.
Yeah.
You might need to do totally different opposite things to two totally different tracks.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't a science project. It's a listening project that we then apply scientific built tools to make musical results.
Yeah.
So tightening up a kick drum or loosening up a kick drum might be what's needed. And you might do it with compression, you might do it with EQ. You might do a long sustain on the kick, you might shorten, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
And so 70s funk, or you could name any style, it wouldn't matter. It still comes back to not just the track, but it comes back to the actual sound of the kick drum that you have on that track.
Yeah.
And then it goes back to the vocal and the story, and it goes back to the feeling. And so all of these things are what matters. The beauty of music engineering is that it's all about listening, which is also the challenge of it. It's all about listening and turning the knobs. So there's no answer to that except, listen and turn the knobs and see, what sounds right.
Yeah.
When it sounds right, it's right. And you can't go wrong. Just experiment. There's nobody standing with a gun over your head if you make a mistake. Just start playing with stuff.
Yeah. I want to pull from some of your other things that you said on the topic. So two things I'd like to add to the conversation. One, if you could, for him, he's wondering how to make his music sound like it's in this genre, right? So you've talked about references and the fence, and you've also talked about the shape of the V, which is a very popular phrase around here lately.
Right.
If you could maybe discuss how he might use those two concepts to go after his goal of that genre.
Well, so if you're saying how does he make kind of old sounding stuff? I mean, distortion, you're distorting everything. It's not a compression thing. It's like the whole chain.
Yeah.
It's the tracking. It's, you have to look at that era and say, what equipment did they use? It was transformer based preamps, tube transformer preamps. What kind of chain did they have? They had very simple tools. it was going to tape. Tape was doing like probably a 15 IPS bump on the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
off the top end from 14, 15K all the way down. So it's you have to just sort of think about what equipment was used then, and then how do I use a plug-in or a different preamp or what have you now to kind of emulate those things.
Mm-hmm.
What we have now is the availability of doing this 20 to 20K thing that nobody wants to hear. Nobody wants to hear 20 to 20K.
Right.
They want to hear things jumping out in different areas. So there's way too much sound coming across in the digital world if you want to be 70s funky.
Mm-hmm.
You want to start rolling off top ends and distorting the chain of every single track.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sansamp and decapitators and whatever, on every single track.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes like bass guitar in that era, like if you solo the bass, it sounds like a car crash.
Yeah.
It's just distorted disaster. But in the track, it sits perfectly. And that's often the case for cool sort of rock and funk bass. If you monoed it out, you'd just be like, whoa, it sounds
mm-hmm.
destroyed. But in the track, it's perfect. Mm-hmm. So, okay, so I got a little off topic, sorry. So you were saying, what was your...
I mean, I think that you hit it, actually. I mean, I'm seeing some questions in the chat just going, people asking for a couple things before we get out of here. Pat is asking...
We're here. Let's do it.
Cool. Pat's asking if we could talk about the shape of the V. And I was, thinking you could almost tie that into the genre reference that our other person was saying. And then... RL Multimedia is saying if you could just quickly talk about clipping the converter and printing back to your computer. That's the end of the sentence.
Okay, we'll do that one because that's quick and easy.
Mm-hmm.
So in my world, because I'm starting in a computer with Sequoia and using a little Pro Q2 and maybe their compressor, but that's it. And then I'm coming out to an analog world where I've got EQ, compression, EQ, modified Focusrite, and then the Lucey Alpha, which is like Class A discrete, kind of neutral. And I might do some mid-side EQing there as well with just a little shaping, or I might just trigger the mids with a side chain so that I'm grabbing kind of kick drum bass stuff in the middle, not compressing broadband. If I compress, that's what I do. I'll throw out a tidbit there. I don't compress. I always compress with the side chain and triggering from the middle. Mm-hmm. So there's your technical snippet of the day.
Yeah.
That's as far as I'll go. Not because it's a secret, just because it's not useful to anybody really.
Right.
And then I'm going with the tube EQ, which is always in a boost position, and then A to D conversion with a very high headroom Class A discrete converter. So I can clip the shit out of that thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's really nice. And as you clip more, you lose some low end, and it gets a little brighter because of all the harmonic distortion that's happening. So level differences of limiting are also EQ differences in analog world. And after that, I hit the L2 for 1.4, and I hit the head to round off the square waves, and then that's it. Mm-hmm. So that the sound of that chain is very important to the sound of my work. I mean, I could fake it digitally, but it wouldn't be the same. Yeah. So to answer that question, I mean, that's what happens. If I'm going to reprint, I'm going to start over. I'm not going to do anything with levels back into Sequoia once it's been done. Did I answer his question?
Yeah, I think it's probably a question of I've heard that mastering engineers clip converters. What's that about?
What's that about? Yeah. Okay. So high headroom analog to digital conversion, like normally, I tend to say Class A discrete is the way to go. That's what I have. That's what I've experienced. But like you can't really with the Burl because it has a transformer, so it kind of slams everything. But if you have like a cleaner kind of Class A discrete box, the analog circuitry has very high headroom, so you get a real clean clip out of the actual converter clipping. Mm-hmm. It's all about the headroom in the box. we should say just very quickly that an A to D converter is kind of four components. There's the analog path. There's the chip that does the conversion. And these are fairly interchangeable. They've been good for a long time. There's the clock that runs the conversion. And then there's the filter, which is usually on a cheaper converter, it's built into the chip.
Mm-hmm.
So the converter and the filter are part of the same thing. Or the chips are built so that you can do the filtering externally. So we'll geek out on D to A for a minute. So my Mytek 8x192 that I use to feed my chain is 15 years old, maybe 20, I forget. That's got the same converter chip as the Bricasti M1. I have the M1 SE special edition, but the M1 D to A, it's the same chip.
Was that modded or that's just stock?
Oh, so what's the difference between them? Obviously, the analog path is totally different between them. I mean, one box is what, $2,500 for 8 channels of A to D and D to A. The other box is, I don't know what they are now, $7,000 or $8,000 for 2 channels of D to A.
Yeah.
So what's the difference? The analog path is totally upgraded in the Bricasti. The same chip. The filtering is done externally. They do their own filtering.
Mm-hmm.
They have like 15 options, and 7 of them are options that they invented. So I use minimum phase 0, which is just the cleanest in that box, and I really like that.
Yeah.
If I used linear phase 2, it would sound more like the Mytek, but it would be different because it's a different box. So those 4 components are what makes it. So the analog part of those 4, that analog stage is why mastering engineers that are, traditionally the high-end engineers working with an analog desk, that's what they've got going on because it clips really nicely. Mm-hmm. That's not to say they may not use the nice modern digital tools as well. They might, I don't do it, but somebody could do it after the fact. You could be modest in your analog clipping, and then you could just do a little limiting in the box, and that would be a kind of a efficient way to do it. Mm-hmm. I don't do it that way, but that's certainly a good way to go, because digital limiters today are really a lot nicer than they were. Yeah. But yeah, if that was your question, yeah, that's what's been happening. Is that the best limiting is still an analog clipping stage from an A to D. It's still the best. It's a very musical thing, because as you push into it, it's like a console, or guitar amp. As you push into it, there's a sweet spot where you're getting really nice musical artifacts, and then it goes too far and it starts to get crappy.
Yeah.
It's the same way with a converter, like you would push the input on a desk, like you push the preamp on a guitar amp, it's that same thing. Things that sound good are often like right at the edge, and then they crap out.
Right.
It's like pushing gear and then it craps out.
Right.
Now, digital plugins don't work that way. They work in a different mindset. But the analog world, that's how everything in analog works. It sounds better up to a certain point of distortion, and then it goes too far.
Yeah. And Andrew Sheps talks about clipping a lot, and it's increasing top end and doing all these things. What are the things that you hear when you clip?
Well, yeah, you get depending on the analog clipping equipment, and it's just like a limiter. There's artifacts. There's artifacts in everything. So it's about musical artifacts and using them in a musically advantageous way. So you have to experiment with things. You push it too far, push it not far enough. Find out where the sweet spot is. I mean, there's engineers with all analog gear with a ton of equipment in a room, and all of it's just set to one thing.
Yeah. And
they might patch it in because that, RCA compressor or that, whatever does one great thing. Mm-hmm. And they just leave them there, And if you had enough money to have a setup like that, it would be pretty cool, because you could just patch in. You might have 4 versions. You might have 2 Fairchilds and 3 RCAs, and and you have all this stuff set at its sweet spot, analog sweet spot, where it does something really well, no matter what you send it.
Yeah,
that's a totally valid way to work if you had all that equipment and a big patch bay to play with it.
Right.
So, back to your question, everything analog just has that sweet spot. And it's about finding it and then working with it. there's a range. It's not necessarily one exact spot, but there's like a range. There's like,
Yeah.
oh, as I lean into my converter more and more and more, I lose low end, and I get some high mid kind of distortion and sparkle. So, that could be perfect. I might want more of that, or I might want less,
Yeah.
or I might want more, but I still want the low end. Then I've got to re-EQ that, or I might want less, but I still want the top end.
Yeah.
So I'll push the EQ where I would have gotten that EQ out of pushing the limiter.
Mm-hmm.
I might just go in and do like a 2 dB digital bump at 5K or something.
Yeah.
To compensate. So it's everything's a work in progress. It's very fluid.
Mm-hmm.
Analog is very fluid, and digital as well. When you start combining things, music production is fluid. Everything interacts with everything else.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about what's the one setting on this one thing, and that's on an island. It's about how does this thing react with that thing,
Right.
And you just got to get in and play with it.
Yeah. So we're not talking about just like slamming the output of your DAW and getting all red lights and perfect square waves when we're talking about clipping.
You probably don't want to do that. Some platforms do kind of clip okay. I mean, there's you can experiment with that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people like ozone, and that sounds terrible to me. So there's a lot of limiters out there that I think are not that great digitally, but they all have a sound.
Mm-hmm.
And clipping your workstation has a sound too.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't probably be my first choice, because that gets you in a world where all your plugins might be in a weird place. Again, plug-in levels are really the game, in my opinion, in the digital world. But yeah, you're more inclined to do pushing things in the analog world. Digital is like, first you have to be safe, and then you have fun.
Yeah.
Analog is like you're pushing everything all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of people that struggle with crossing the realm too. It takes a minute to get used to the workflow.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, in the beginning of doing a lot of digital stuff, a lot of people were pushing it too much, and then smart people realized like that's just dumb. It's working against the processing potential of the software.
Yeah.
And that's why, going back to the earlier question, if your levels are peaking up over -20, you're cool. You make sure you're just not. You don't want to crush the plugins with input level or output level. I mean, depending. I don't speak as the world's greatest expert on plugins, certainly, but as a general rule, keep the action being in your choices, not in the gain.
Yeah.
But in analog, it's a different thing. Analog was all about gain staging, and still is. So,
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. This has been great.
Thank you. Was that it?
Yeah.
I thought there was one more. Was that not? There was the. I thought there were two there.
Oh, there was the clipping thing, and shape of the V. If you want to add on to.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Probably the most important question of the day. So what I'm talking about with shape of the V is, pop music. Let's just be kind of generic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pop music, rock music, or your graph was actually like pop music, rock music, and then like alternative music.
Right.
Which is probably better. Your graph is probably better than mine. When I go like this, I'm talking about the low end coming down into the sides.
Yeah.
So in pop music.
Oh yeah, we should probably define first for anybody who hasn't seen like the article or the piece of the video that it's all low end that you're discussing.
Yeah, what we're talking about is the amount of low end that is on the sides.
Mm-hmm.
And by side I mean not just hard panned, but anything panned, even up into here.
Mm-hmm.
So as basic physics, again, not to be offensive, but let's just be real about what's going on. We have two speakers. Everything panned to the middle is equally powerful out of both speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And it floats as a ghost image in the middle, right? As we pan, we increase the power on one side or the other, and it moves the image from side to side, okay? Very basic.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening when we pan is that more volume is on this side, less is on this side, up to the point that it's all on this side or it's all on this side.
Mm-hmm.
So the most powerful places for a signal to be are symmetrically balanced, full left and full right, so-called cardinal points or LCR panning.
Mm-hmm.
When things are panned in the netherworld, they float. It's almost like they have a built-in reverb to them. They almost have ambience because it makes the room kind of activate in a way where there's a certain kind of lack of punch.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the punchiest thing is down the middle, or punchy is full left or full right. Those are really punchy. And then these things in here and over here, they're a little floaty, right? Because they bounce around the room. So what we're talking about here with panning of low end is the shape of the V. And this is an instantaneous style marker to people on a subconscious level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a big component in production decision because it really affects the punch, which is kick and bass related. And kick and bass are centered in pockets. They're down the middle. So the kick and the bass have the deepest low end, and they are either kick bass or kick bass. They're competing for space down here on the bottom of the center. So things that are panned out to the side that have low end, okay, what they really are is they're like, you know, if it's panned over here, let's say it's a guitar, it's panned about halfway. So there's more of it here and less of it here, but it's in both.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, where's the bass and the kick? They're in both equally. So that guitar is now on top of the bass and the kick on this channel.
Mm-hmm.
And if it was panned this way, the guitar frequencies are on top of the bass and the kick in this channel. They're now competing. So this is bass, kick, and now guitar, and or over on this side. So the more low end that's panned out to the sides, intrinsically there's less clarity of the kick and the bass down the middle. That's clear. That's a simple fact. The shape of this V that I'm talking about, the shape of the low end panning, which is really the shape of the V, the shape of the low end panning is really important on a bunch of levels. Firstly, it's a style indicator. So, you know, single ladies, Beyonce, right? All the low end is kick, bass, everything that's panned out to the sides is sparkly high end. That's a very
The
common
stuff outside of the V.
Outside of it. It's all up here. There's nothing down here.
Mm-hmm.
It's all twinklies, and the more left and right differences that you have that are high frequency, the bigger the production sounds.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, just basic mixing, the biggest production ever would be 3 channels, panned left, center, and right. That's it. Like Miles Davis' Kind of Blue, it's 3 channels of tape, right? It's a 3-track tape jazz record, most popular selling and one of the greatest, if not the greatest, jazz recordings of all time, done over 2 days with these amazing players. They came in the room, they had more than 3 mics set up, but they submixed the 3 mics down to 3 channels of tape, and they made this great recording.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very clear. You've got punchy things here, punchy things here, and punchy things here. There's nothing panned here. Because it used to be you'd have a left, center, right switch on a console.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have a pot, you had a switch. And technically that really works. It's really punchy. So when you start panning, you're getting into this nether region where it's kind of ambient in the room, and the low end that's over here is competing with the kick and the bass that are equally coming out of both sides. So it's very important to think about this, and this is why my original point about the location of monitors in the room, their width in the room and their angle and their frequency balance is all very important, because your mix gets intrinsically better the better your monitoring is placed and the better you deal with the panning and EQing of low end that's not kick and bass. Mm-hmm. Those are 2 huge components to making clear, punchy mixes. Now, the shape of the V, as we've said, dictates also a subconscious indicator of style. So let's say we have a 10-song record, and there's a flow within the record. Like some of the songs are more kind of a more pop, where there's not much low end over here on the sides. Some of them get to be more meaty. You're going to have that flow. Or you might have a record that starts out kind of like modern rock, guitars with meat, and then some of it gets really low endy on the sides, where the punch starts to go away.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of more of like an alternative music or an experimental kind of sound in any style, where you don't have clear kick and bass punching here, because you've got so much competition from the low end at the sides.
Right.
So a record might start kind of punchy and then get kind of alternative, or it might be kind of pop and it might go to here, or a record just might be here, or it might just be here, or it might just be here.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times records will just stay in one range and have very subtle, very, very subtle variation from track to track.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is all very important to be aware of. I'm of an era where punk rock was a thing that happened, when I was alive. It's not like a historical fact.
Yeah.
And the punk rock thing, which was sort of anti-snobbery, anti-technology, which was cool. It was like a DIY thing, like DIY engineering was like, hey, anybody can play. And we're not here about being proficient. We're here about having something to say. And we're just going to bang it out. Now it's sort of like a historical style. It's like reggae. Like it has a fashion component. You think of all these things in a totally different way looking back in time. But at the time that it came out, it was a DIY kind of a music. And because it was a DIY music, the engineering of it was also not super pro. Mm-hmm. And so part of the sound was that it had a lot of messy low end panned out to the sides. It wasn't particularly punchy in the middle.
Right.
And that's now like a distinguishing feature of what is a punky kind of sound.
Mm-hmm.
It's become like in our pantheon of engineering choices, that's like a historical reference point.
Right.
Whereas pop was always like this, whether it be funk, this is also mono, right?
Right.
So we started in mono, and then as we went into stereo, different things happened where eventually the low end, maybe 70s rock with guitars that are meaty is kind of this shape.
Mm-hmm.
In late 70s, we got into punk where it came down here and took away the punch. So we have this whole range of options on how much low end can exist on the sides
mm-hmm.
and what it does to the style. So when we're talking about the shape of the V, we're talking about the way that low end is panned and the way that it's filtered so that it does or does not affect the clarity and punch of the kick and the bass.
Right.
And this is just a really important thing to do, because if you have the wrong kind of frequency balance on your sides, then you're in conflict with your style. Because every style has a range of shape that in the brain now, because we all have this recorded history of music in our brain, we instantly sort of equate certain styles with certain low frequency shapes.
Mm-hmm.
And if your shape is not in concert with your style, then your mix is going to sound like it sucks, because it's not going to resonate with people's brain about what they expect.
Right.
By the same token, within a record where you have variation, you might use the different shaping to make a song more of a poppy single, and to make another song have a more earthy, punky authenticity that's not so produced.
Yeah. Yeah.
When people say the thing is too produced, what they're really saying is, well, for my expectation of this style, there's not enough low end on the sides. I'm just getting this like poppy, punchy, bright, sparkly mix kind of sound.
Right.
And that sounds too produced because it makes it sound cheap.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it sound trying too hard. It's too pop. Music has a relationship between its shape and the perception of it, from poppy to, let's say like 70s rock kind of thing, down to something that's like more kind of trashed in the low end, but has a real organic, earthy authenticity to it, like punk rock kind of did.
Yeah.
See what I mean? So it's really important to think about this so that we can style our mixes, and in my case, I subtly tweak mastering. We can style our work to elicit the right response from the audience.
Yeah.
You know, if it's like, for example, you know, I did a record for an artist that had a big record, and then the follow-up record was a little bit more pop than the previous record. And so if I would have not adhered to these kind of principles, if I would have just let the low end be just as messy on the sides, you know, now I'm thinking real big picture here, because you're thinking the audience's perception of this new music versus the previous music, right? So the audience wants, they love this record. This record is a little more pop, so the shape has to change,
Yeah.
to suit the perception.
Mm-hmm.
And with the record, the shape changes subtly to suit the flow of the record.
Yeah.
Which of these songs are more a single? Which of these songs are more the authentic kind of songs that ground you to an artist in a different way than a single does?
Mm-hmm.
So this language of the shape of the low end panning is a huge component in perception of quality, perception of style, perception of artistic integrity, and physics. It's a huge component in punch, in what's happening with danceability, movability, groovability.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all popular music has a great groove. It's the first component in anything that's popular, is it has a killer groove.
Yeah.
You know, it starts with the groove and then it goes to the vocal. That's
Yep.
my personal opinion.
Yeah.
And I think there's been some scientific tests on that.
Yeah.
Groove is everything in popularity. So if you want to be popular, you've got to have a clear groove. Now the question is, within that confine of punch, then this side stuff speaks to a certain kind of artistic authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
in the subconscious mind of people. It's something they hear immediately.
Yep.
So I hope that helps to kind of explain what the thought process is.
Absolutely.
And the only way that you can go about making these kind of decisions is, again, about monitoring. You've got to have your monitor set up in a way that you're able to say to yourself, oh, okay, there's good punch in all these tracks, and some of them I hear the low end, and some of them I hear are just kind of pop. And I have in my mind now, a frame of reference for what the recorded history of music sounds like
mm-hmm.
in my room.
Right.
So I can now play with what I'm doing within that fence, within the confines of what's been done before and what people's expectations are.
Right.
With their expectations, I can work against their expectations. I can give them a little cookie here. I can take it back here. I can do a pop thing. I can do an authentic thing at the same time. Maybe the verse and the chorus change shape.
Right.
But
Yeah.
this is all about knowing that we're working within a fence. There's no freedom without knowing the fence. And the shape of the low end panning, or the shape of the V, is a huge component in being successful at conveying the artistic intentions, presence, and relatability of the artist.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic answer. And it's very useful for mixers and producers too. You know.
So no, it's totally useful. I mean, I was speaking to mixers.
Yeah.
And producers.
Yeah. The
I'm
idea of just
pleasing.
even working with a punk band, you know, like that's a
Totally.
common thing. It's the first thing that you hear is like, it's too clean. So that's how you fix.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't do that. You know, that low end that comes out on the sides is authenticity. It's a kind of naturalism. I mean, again, if we just took a mix that was like recorded live, let's just do a band in a room, and if you just pull up the faders, that's kind of what you get. You get a kind of a messy thing.
Yeah.
And there's no intentional action happening. Therefore, there's the full frequency range of the stuff that's panned, and it's in the way of the middle, and it just sort of sounds like a mess.
Right.
What we consider a natural recording isn't natural at all, as I alluded to earlier. You go in and you do stuff. But then you can take it even further, and you can take it even further, and you can take it even further. And then you get into something that's like really, really poppy, really, really fun, can sound like a really exciting, product.
Yeah.
And that's a pop product. But then within that realm, there's still the element of it needs to be authentic. So even the most pop production in the pop product, it can't come across like an ignorable beer commercial.
Yep.
And that's where, avoiding the robot comes in. That's where shaping the V intelligently comes in. That's where making sure that the authentic artist connection happens, even in a very pop shape where there's not a lot of low end out here.
Yeah.
That Destiny's Child track, Single Ladies, is great because you got 3 vocalists, and you've got a very clean, clear, booming kick and bass with no need for anything on the sides because they're not like a guitar or keyboard or saxophone, or they're not that kind of group, right?
Yeah.
So that's a fun mix because you've got 3 vocals left, right, center at many times, with really strong left, right, center clarity, to the rules of left, right, center, or something like, AC/DC where they've got the guitars on the side, or so many of Chad Blake's mixes where he does a lot of LCR panning, and I mean I could name mixer after mixer. Every mixer is aware, every top mixer is aware of this sort of left, center, right, low end shaping concept.
Right.
It's just a question of how they go about doing it to present the artist, in the right way for the moment that they're in.
Yeah. There's, we just released that video, and there was an article about that came out as well. And I was, doing the first listen on the new 21 Pilots record, for example. And I thought about it several times as I was kind of going through it, because they really play with that quite a bit. There's times where an 808's just coming out of the right speaker and that stuff. And it's
right.
Sort of, I mean, it's very much playing with that because the natural sensibility would be the 808 stays in the center. So
Right, and they're playing with it. I mean,
yeah.
It goes back to like the 60s. Early recording, you might have had the drum kit on a mono mic on the right channel or the left channel. It's not like it's never been done. But yeah, it's theme and variation. You're playing with an expectation. So you've got to know what the theme is to create your variations. You have to know what the expectations are and what those expectations mean to people to be able to mess with the expectations, which creates excitement.
Yeah.
There's no right answer here. There's no correct setting for any of this. This is a taste thing based on having a frame of reference for the recorded history of music, a frame of reference in your room based on where your monitors are, and then thinking about things in terms of left, center, right power, and thinking about the shape of the low end, which all factors into the excitement and freshness of your particular song on your particular day.
Right.
This is all like background. You've got to have that frame of reference background to do things that either hit an expectational home run or take a left turn, like you said, on the 808, which is a different kind of cool thing.
Right.
And they can get away with that, right? They wouldn't have done that maybe on the first song they put out.
Right.
Because people would have thought, who are these idiots?
Yeah.
But now they can do it because it's cool.
Yeah. And they're known for that a little bit, like messing with the genre and
messing with it. Right.
Yeah.
It's like Radiohead didn't start out making in rainbows.
Yeah. Right.
But when they took a turn, people could go with them because they had been validated by the fact of being set up with previous albums that met other sort of expectations of the rock genre.
Right.
So then it's like, oh, you're a genius now. So you've got to know when to play it safe and when to play it a little bit wacky to enhance your artistic stature. And so what is playing it safe and what is playing it not safe, that's all part of knowing these frame of reference issues.
Absolutely. Well, cool. Yeah, lots of shape of the V questions and all that stuff coming through. Somebody's asking about an upper V for mids. Interesting concept.
Well, it's all the same thing, right? So when I say low end, I mean I'm talking about. I mean, I'm not going to put a number on it, but it's not just 60 or 100 or 200. As things are panned out, even if they have something at 200, it doesn't have to be at 60. You're gonna notice that
Hmm.
it's gonna start to compete, because the bass guitar comes up into higher ranges,
Hmm.
harmonic, kick drum can as well. So, you know, when I say low end, I should be more clear. I'm talking about the not high end. I'm
Right.
talking about things which are not just high end. So if you just had bass and kick centered, and then you had really bright something here like a shaker, like a, and then you
Hmm.
over here you got a tambourine on the one and the two. I'm being really pedantic about it. You'd have two different high end things that had no low end and really no mid range either, and they would create a very wide mix. And then you'd have like a bass and a kick and a vocal here, and that would be like a very pop sort of thing.
Yeah.
So as soon as this shaker becomes, you know, something like, I mean, even if it became a flute, you're starting to get down into the registers, and it becomes a saxophone, and it becomes a guitar. Like, you start to come down and down and down. And if
Hmm.
that's panned out, it starts to compete. The harmonics of low end instruments don't end in the bottom.
Right.
Harmonics go up a long way.
Hmm.
Kick drums can go up a long way.
Yeah.
Bass guitar can go up a long way, and they can come into vocal. And so all of this is really more. It's a good point, because now that we're talking about it more, it's important to be more exact.
Yeah.
I'm talking about what is not the high end.
Right.
So mid range counts, low mids absolutely counts, low end totally counts. But yeah, anything below high end starts to mess with the clarity of the center,
Right.
in the overtone series of things that are in the middle.
Right.
It all matters. So that's a good question.
Yeah. That's great. I love that concept, and thank you for that explanation. That's one I haven't heard before. It's very unique to you.
Yeah,
Very
it's
cool.
it's. I think it's really useful, and I've never heard anybody talking about it, and I think about it every day. So I've been talking about it for a bit now, to try and really give people more power, and get them in the kind of mindset where they can really be more effective. You
Hmm.
know, we definitely, there's a big component to music making, which is emotional, but then there's a big component which is just physics and the frame of reference of the recorded history of music.
Yeah.
And we can't really be emotional until we know that we're in the right field.
Hmm.
That's when acting on intuition and being creative in that way really starts to pay off, because we have a sense of the monitoring in the room. We have a sense of the mid to side power. We have a sense of the high end, low mids, low end in different styles, and we have a sense of the fence. And when we know that, it's more of a sphere, right? It's
Hmm.
not a two-dimensional fence. When we know, like, this is the recorded history of music, right? It could be all these things. Then we can really choose where we want to play in there.
Right.
If this is the sphere, I might get a record that's right here, just outside the sphere, and I might bring it into right here, or I might have to take it over to here.
Hmm.
So for me, this playing with the expectations of the recorded history of music versus this particular project is an everyday thing. But I think it also, for great mixers, they're definitely thinking this way. They're definitely thinking in terms of mid-side power. They're definitely thinking in terms of the difference between pop and less pop, and that's all part of the language, the advanced language of mixing.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's great. Fantastic stuff. So yeah, we have more stuff coming with you in the near future. We've already shot some other things, and we have a video of you mastering the Black Keys record. So that'll be out no later than very soon, as Fab says. We also have a course coming with Brian, also no later than very soon, or slightly thereafter. And yeah,
Yeah.
I hope to do more of these with you. It's been amazing.
Well, we just, I guess, the video was out last week, and so
Hmm.
it's still kind of fresh. We can do this again in the future. Just let me know if
Yeah,
people are interested, and we'll do this again.
yeah,
I'm always happy to, do anything I can to inspire people to do great things and to raise the general level of conversation about what it is that we do, so that the right ideas, the musical ideas, which I consider the right ideas, are pushed forward, and the technical stuff that matters, which is kind of what we're talking about here, is pushed forward. There's definitely physics things and technical things that really matter,
Right.
and then there are technical things that really don't matter that much. And hopefully we've clarified some of that in this conversation, at least from my perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much. Guys, again, check out Brian's video over on the site. There was a free article and an excerpt, again, about the shape of the V that you guys can check out. If you're not pro members, you can watch all that for free. We also, just a couple quick housekeeping things. We also have a Facebook group. It's called Puremixers. Brian and a lot of the other guys on the site are, popping in and out of there whenever they have time a lot, and they'll comment on posts and stuff, so you can reach out. You can reach Brian at magicgardenmastering.com, right? Any other places they should check out your work or find out more about you?
I mean, yeah, send an email. We're on Instagram as well. Facebook. There's a Magic Garden Mastering Facebook page, but whatever works.
Yeah, it's great. And then finally, one last thank you to our sponsor. We want to thank Gearsluts for making this possible and helping us to promote the event. And as always, Brian, thank you so much for sharing your time and knowledge with us. You let us, talk to you for 3 hours here, and just thank you for being so free with your time.
Oh shoot.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll see you next week in New York, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah.
I'll be there for a day or two, maybe Thursday night.
Yes. Yeah. Anybody going to AES, we have an event Thursday night. We're going to be meeting up at a bar called 2A in the Lower East Side. And then we're going to be taking you guys over to Flux Studios for a tour of Flux New York. And we'll take you through all the different rooms, and you can see where Fab shoots his videos and all that stuff. So come out and join us. Some of the mentors will be there. You'll get to meet them in person. It should be a lot of fun. It'd be great to see you guys and shake hands. So cool.
So thank you.
Yeah.
See you soon, and we'll do this again whenever it's needed.
Sounds awesome. Great.
All right, man.
Thanks again, Brian.
Have a good one.